Welcome back to another story on God of Fiction. This time, we're bringing you, what if Lord Harry Potter used his 15 ancient rings to bankrupt the Weasleys and Malfoys in one day? Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Audit. The letter arrived by Goblin Courier, which should have been Harry's first clue that something was off. Goblin couriers didn't deliver mail. Owls delivered mail. Goblin couriers delivered summons, and the difference between the two was roughly the same as the difference between an invitation to tea and a subpoena. The goblin, barely 3 feet tall and dressed in Gringotts leather so dark it was almost black, didn't wait for Harry to open the envelope. He thrust it into Harry's hands at the door of Grimmauld Place, said, "Tomorrow, sunrise, Manager Griptooth's office, bring your wand and your blood," and vanished with a crack that rattled every window on the street. Harry stood in the doorway in his boxers, holding an envelope sealed with the Gringotts crest, and thought, well, that's my Saturday ruined. He'd been back from the war for 9 months. 9 months of funerals, rebuilding, testimony before the Wisengamot, interviews he didn't want to give, and a steadily growing sense that the world expected him to just settle. Get a job at the ministry. Marry Ginny. Become an Auror. Follow the script. He hadn't followed the script. He and Ginny had tried for about 3 weeks before they'd both admitted, with surprising honesty over a bottle of fire whiskey, that they loved each other the way you love someone you survived a war with, fiercely, permanently, and not at all romantically. She'd gone back to the Harpies training camp. He'd gone back to Grimmauld Place and started trying to figure out who Harry Potter was when he wasn't trying not to die. The answer, so far, was, a 19-year-old with too much money, not enough sleep, and a house that still screamed at him when he walked past the 2nd-floor landing. He opened the letter. Mr. Potter, a mandatory audit of all accounts, vaults, holdings, and hereditary claims attached to your magical signature has been initiated by the Inheritance Division of Gringotts Bank. Your presence is required. Non-attendance will result in automatic forfeiture of all unclaimed assets to the Goblin Nation, per the Gringotts Accord of 1403. Sincerely, Griptooth, Senior Account Manager, Inheritance and Bloodline Division. Harry read it twice. Then he went to find pants. The sun wasn't up yet when he apparat to the top of the steps outside Gringotts. Diagon Alley was empty, the shops dark, the cobblestones still wet from overnight rain. The bank itself glowed faintly, the white marble catching the pre-dawn light in a way that made it look less like a building and more like a set of teeth. He pushed through the bronze doors. A goblin he didn't recognize was waiting just inside, younger than Griptooth, wearing the silver insignia of a junior manager. She looked him up and down with the flat, assessing stare that goblins gave to everything they were deciding whether to eat. "Potter?" "That's me." "Wand." He handed it over. She didn't examine it, she pressed it against a stone tablet set into the wall. Runes flared gold, then faded. "Blood. You lot always know how to make a bloke feel welcome." She didn't smile. She held out a black stone bowl and a silver knife. Harry pricked his thumb without hesitation, he'd done this enough times, and let 3 drops fall into the bowl. The blood hit the stone and moved, spreading in patterns that looked almost like writing before being absorbed completely. The goblin studied the empty bowl for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was more like a hunter catching a scent. "Follow me," she said, and her voice had changed. Softer. More careful. The way you talk when you're carrying something fragile and expensive. She led him deep into Gringotts, past the main hall, past the cart tunnels, through a series of corridors Harry had never seen before. The walls changed from marble to raw stone to something older, darker, carved with runes that pulsed faintly as he walked past. They went down. Then further down. Then down again, until Harry's ears popped and he was fairly sure they were somewhere beneath the Thames. The door at the end of the final corridor was iron, 12 feet tall, and covered in so many locking enchantments that the air in front of it shimmered like heat haze. The junior manager pressed her palm to it, spoke 3 words in gobbledygook, and it swung open. The room beyond was enormous. Circular, domed, lit by floating orbs of pale blue light. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with shelves, and every shelf was packed with ledgers, scrolls, boxes, and artifacts that hummed with old magic. In the center of the room was a stone table, and behind the stone table sat Griptooth. Harry had met Griptooth once before, briefly, when he'd come to sort out Sirius's will. The goblin was old even by goblin standards, which meant he'd been alive when the Statute of Secrecy was signed. His skin was the color and texture of dried leather, his fingers were long enough to wrap around a human throat twice, and his eyes were black from edge to edge. He wore no jewelry, no insignia of rank. He didn't need to. Every other goblin in Gringotts deferred to Griptooth the way water defers to gravity. He was not alone. A woman sat in a chair to the left of the table. She was young, Harry's age, maybe a year older, with dark hair pulled back in a severe knot, pale skin, and grey eyes that tracked Harry the moment he walked through the door. She wore professional robes in charcoal, cut close and precise, and she was holding a quill over a stack of parchment like she'd been taking notes. Harry didn't recognize her for a second, and then he did. Daphne Greengrass. Slytherin. They'd shared a year of potions and she'd never spoken a single word to him. She was watching him now with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not hostile. Not friendly. Evaluating. Sit, Griptooth said. Harry sat. Mr. Potter. Griptooth's voice sounded like 2 stones grinding together. Do you know why you are here? Your letter mentioned an audit. My letter mentioned the minimum required to compel your attendance. What I am about to tell you goes considerably beyond an audit. Griptooth folded his hands on the table. Before I begin, I must introduce Ms. Greengrass. She has been retained by Gringotts as an independent magical solicitor for this process. Her presence is required by law. She represents your interests, not ours. Harry looked at Daphne. We've met. Sort of. We haven't, Daphne said. Her voice was cool, clear, and completely unbothered. We occupied the same building for 6 years. That's not the same thing. Fair enough. Ms. Greengrass was selected for her expertise in hereditary magical law and her lack of personal or financial ties to any of the parties involved in this matter, Griptooth continued. She has signed a blood oath of confidentiality and impartiality. You may trust her or not, as you choose, but she will be present. Parties involved, Harry repeated. You make it sound like there are sides. Griptooth smiled. Harry had seen goblin smiles before, and they never stopped being unsettling, too many teeth, too sharp, arranged in an expression that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with anticipation. Mr. Potter, there are always sides. You have simply never been told which one you're on. He opened a ledger, a massive thing, bound in black leather, thick as a dictionary. Let us begin with what you believe you own. Harry shrugged. The Potter Vault. The Black Vault, from Sirius. Grimmauld Place. That's about it. That, Griptooth said, is what you were told you own. It is not even close to the truth. He turned the ledger to face Harry. The Potter family is not, as you have been led to believe, a moderately wealthy pure-blood house of middling historical significance. The Potter family is one of the 7 founding houses of magical Britain. Your lineage predates Hogwarts. It predates the Ministry. It predates, Mr. Potter, the very concept of organized magical government on this island. Harry stared at the ledger. The page was covered in names, dates, family trees branching and merging across centuries. He saw Potter at the center, but the branches that fed into it were staggering, names he recognized, names he didn't, connections that spiderwebbed out across the entire history of Wizarding Britain. The reason you were never told this, Griptooth continued, is because someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure you wouldn't be. Your magical guardian, Albus Dumbledore, sealed your full inheritance records the night your parents died. He invoked an obscure clause in the Weissengemot charter that allowed a guardian to defer a minor's inheritance claims in the interest of the child's safety. The deferral was meant to last until your 17th birthday. It did not expire. Why not? Because Dumbledore died before he could lift it, and no one else had the authority or, I suspect, the inclination. Griptooth's black eyes glittered. The seal remained in place until 3 weeks ago, when it finally degraded to the point where our detection wards flagged the anomaly. The moment we looked into your accounts, Mr. Potter, we found. He paused, and Harry got the impression the goblin was choosing his next word with the precision of a jeweler choosing where to cut a diamond. Irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Griptooth didn't answer immediately. He reached beneath the table and produced a wooden box, old, plain, unvarnished. He set it on the table between them and opened the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, were 15 rings. Harry had seen magical rings before. The gaunt ring. Dumbledore's various trinkets. But these were something else entirely. Each one was distinct, different metals, different stones, different sizes, but they all shared a quality that Harry could only describe as weight. Not physical weight. Magical weight. The air above the box shimmered and thickened, and Harry could feel his own magic responding, pulling toward them like iron filings toward a magnet. These, Griptooth said, are your lordship rings. 15, Harry said. 15. Daphne set her quill down. It was the first time she'd stopped writing since Harry walked in, and he noticed that her hand was perfectly steady, but her pupils were dilated. She was rattled. She was hiding it well, but she was rattled. Mr. Potter, she said, I've been reviewing your files for 3 weeks. I've read over 4,000 pages of contracts, deeds, wills, and hereditary claims. I need you to understand that what Griptooth is about to explain to you is not normal. There has never, in the recorded history of magical Britain, been a single wizard with legitimate claim to 15 lordship rings. The previous record was 9, held by Aldric the Vast in the 14th century, and he conquered most of Scotland to get them. I didn't conquer anything. You conquered Voldemort, she said, and the name didn't make her flinch, which Harry noted. And Voldemort, in his obsession with pure-blood legacy, had spent decades accumulating hereditary claims through murder, coercion, and magical theft. When you killed him, every claim he held that was based on right of conquest transferred to you. That's 4 rings right there. Griptooth took over. The remaining 11 come through blood, will, and legal default. I will enumerate. He held up a finger for each one. Potter. Peveril, your direct patrilineal descent from Ignotus Peveril, confirmed by the Deathly Hallows. Gryffindor, the Potter line descends from Godric Gryffindor's youngest daughter, a fact that has been suppressed for centuries but which your blood has now confirmed beyond dispute. Black, Sirius Black's will, uncontested. Fleamont, the maternal branch of the Potter family, a separate lordship that was merged with Potter 2 centuries ago but never formally dissolved. 5 fingers up. He switched hands. Through conquest of Voldemort, Slytherin, Voldemort's primary claim, now yours. Gaunt, subsumed under the Slytherin claim but carrying its own separate lordship. Lestrange, Voldemort held this by oath of vassalage from Rodolphius Lestrange, who died in the Battle of Hogwarts. Rosier, same mechanism, the Rosier line is extinct, Voldemort held the claim. Dolohov, Antonin Dolohov pledged his family's lordship to Voldemort in 1971. He died in the battle. The claim transfers. 10 fingers. He put his hands down and simply listed the rest. Through legal default and unclaimed inheritance, Crabbe, the Crabbe lordship passed to Vincent Crabbe, who died without heirs. The family had an ancient vassalage oath to the Slytherin line, which you now hold, making you the default claimant. Goyle, identical mechanism. Carrow, the surviving Carrows have been sentenced to life in Azkaban and magically stripped of their titles. As holder of the Slytherin lordship to which they were sworn, the title defaults to you. Selwyn, extinct line, vassalage oath, same mechanism. Harry counted. 14. That's 14. Griptooth's smile widened. The 15th is Pruitt. The room went very quiet. Pruitt, Harry said. As in Molly Weasley née Pruitt? As in Gideon and Fabian Pruitt, who died in the First War without producing heirs. The Pruitt lordship has sat unclaimed for 18 years. By law, it should have passed to the closest magical relative. Mrs. Weasley would have been the obvious candidate, but she married into the Weasley family and formally renounced her Pruitt claims as part of her marriage contract, a standard practice among pure-blood families at the time. She could not inherit. The lordship required a male line or direct magical line claimant. And that's me. How? Daphne answered this one. She'd clearly been waiting for it, her notes were already open to the relevant page. Your grandmother, Euphemia Potter née Folly, had a maternal grandmother who was born Pruitt. It's a distant connection, but magical inheritance doesn't care about distance, it cares about strength of magical resonance. The Pruitt lordship ring has been tested against every possible claimant for 18 years and rejected them all. 3 weeks ago, when your inheritance seals broke, Gringotts tested your blood against every unclaimed lordship in their vaults. She met his eyes. The Pruitt ring accepted you. Harry looked at the box. 15 rings. 15 families. 15 histories, fortunes, properties, political seats, and webs of obligation stretching back centuries. Right, he said. So what does this actually mean? Griptooth leaned forward. It means, Mr. Potter, that you are the wealthiest wizard in Britain by a factor of approximately 30. It means you hold, or will hold, once you formally claim these rings, 15 seats in the Wizengamot, making you the single most powerful political force in the country. It means you own approximately 11% of all magical real estate in the British Isles, including properties you've never heard of. It means you are the feudal overlord of 4 formerly vassal houses. He paused. And it means that when we examined the financial records attached to these lordships, we discovered that you have been robbed. The word landed like a stone in still water. Harry felt something shift in his chest, not surprise, exactly. Something colder. Something that had been sleeping for a long time and was now opening its eyes. Robbed, he said. Systematically. Extensively. Over a period of 17 years. Griptooth opened a second ledger. This one was red. Shall I start with the Malfoys or the Weasleys? Harry looked at Daphne. She looked back at him with those grey eyes and gave him the smallest nod. Not encouragement. Confirmation. This is real. This is what I found. I'm sorry. Start from the beginning, Harry said. Don't leave anything out. Griptooth opened the red ledger to the first page. On November 1, 1981, the day after your parents' murder, Albus Dumbledore was appointed your magical guardian by emergency decree of the Wizengamot. This gave him full authority over your financial affairs until you reached the age of majority. Among his first acts was the sealing of your full inheritance, which I've already described. His second act was the establishment of a maintenance fund for your care, drawn from the Potter Vault. A maintenance fund, Harry repeated. For my care. I lived in a cupboard under the stairs. Griptooth didn't react to that. The fund was set at 2,000 galleons per month, a generous sum, intended to cover your housing, feeding, clothing, education, and general welfare. The payments were sent to your Muggle guardians. The Dursleys never spent a canute on me. I wore Dudley's old clothes. I ate scraps. We are aware. The Dursleys received the payments in Muggle currency, converted automatically by Gringotts. Our records show they deposited every payment into their own savings account. Over 16 years, this amounts to 384,000 galleons, roughly £2 million. Harry's jaw tightened but he said nothing. However, the maintenance fund is not the primary issue. The primary issue is what happened to the rest of your estate while Dumbledore controlled it. Griptooth turned several pages. In 1982, Dumbledore authorized the transfer of a significant portfolio of Potter investment holdings to a blind trust managed by the Wisengamot's Office of Magical Estate Management. This office was, at the time, chaired by one Cornelius Fudge, then a junior undersecretary, and administered by a board of 3 trustees. Who were the trustees? Lucius Malfoy, Albus Dumbledore, and Molly Weasley née Pruitt, in her capacity as your mother's designated emergency guardian. The silence after that was absolute. Harry didn't move. Didn't blink. He could hear his own pulse. He was aware of Daphne watching him, her quill suspended an inch above parchment, waiting. Molly Weasley, he said, very quietly, was my mother's designated emergency guardian. Lily Potter and Molly Weasley were close during the First War. Your mother's will, which was also sealed by Dumbledore, named Sirius Black as your primary guardian, the Longbottoms as secondary, and Molly Pruitt Weasley as tertiary. With Black in prison and the Longbottoms incapacitated, Mrs. Weasley should have received custody of you. Instead, Dumbledore overrode the will and placed you with the Dursleys, citing the Blood Ward protection. Mrs. Weasley accepted a position on the trust board as compensation. Compensation for what? For not fighting the guardianship decision. The trust paid her a stipend. 1,500 galleons per year, drawn from your estate, for her service as trustee. She has received this payment every year for 17 years. Total, 25,500 galleons. Harry did the math. It wasn't a fortune, not compared to what the Dursleys had taken. But the Weasleys had always struggled for money. The difference between Arthur's ministry salary and their actual expenses had never quite added up. Now he knew why. Does Arthur know? Harry asked. We have no evidence that Arthur Weasley was aware of the stipend or the trust arrangement. The payments were made to an account in Mrs. Weasley's maiden name. Daphne spoke up. For what it's worth, Mr. Potter, I investigated this thread extensively. The stipend itself, while ethically questionable, was technically legal. Mrs. Weasley was named trustee and was entitled to compensation. The amount was within normal bounds. If this were the extent of the Weasley connection, I wouldn't have flagged it. But it's not the extent. No. She turned to a section in her own notes. The trust that managed your investment portfolio made a series of trades and transfers over 17 years. Most were legitimate, standard portfolio management. But a pattern emerges when you track the beneficiaries. Approximately 40% of the trust's trades were conducted through Malfoy-controlled brokerages, which charged a 15% commission, 3 times the market rate. Lucius Malfoy personally profited by an estimated 800,000 galleons from these commissions alone. 800,000. The Malfoys also used their knowledge of Potter portfolio movements to front-run trades, buying assets they knew the trust would purchase, then selling them to the trust at inflated prices. This is illegal under both magical and Muggle law. Conservative estimate of profit from front-running, another 400,000 galleons. Harry turned to Griptooth. And this was happening under Dumbledore's nose? Griptooth's expression was unreadable. It was happening under Dumbledore's authority. Whether he was aware, negligent, or complicit, we cannot say with certainty. What we can say is that he signed every quarterly report for 17 years without ever raising an objection. There's more on the Malfoy side, Daphne said. She wasn't rushing, but she wasn't gentle about it either. She was delivering facts the way a surgeon delivers a diagnosis, clean, precise, and trusting Harry to handle it. After Voldemort's first fall, Lucius Malfoy claimed the Imperius Defense and avoided Azkaban. What's less known is that he simultaneously filed a civil suit against the Potter estate, claiming that your father had destroyed a collection of priceless dark artifacts during an order raid on a Malfoy property. The suit was filed 3 days after your parents died, when there was no one to contest it. It was approved by the trust, Malfoy voting for it, Dumbledore abstaining, and the third vote. Molly, Harry said. Mrs. Weasley voted to approve the settlement. The Potter estate paid the Malfoy family 200,000 galleons in damages for items that, according to ministry records, never existed. Harry stood up. He didn't say anything, just stood, walked 3 paces from the table, and stopped. He could feel the magic in him churning. Not building toward an explosion. Concentrating. Focusing. Like a lens gathering light into a single white-hot point. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about going hungry while the Dursleys ate roast dinners. He thought about Molly Weasley hugging him at the burrow, feeding him, calling him dear, and all the while cashing checks drawn from his dead parents' money. He thought about Lucius Malfoy sneering at him across the Wizengamot, dripping with wealth stolen from a baby whose parents weren't even cold in the ground. And he thought about Dumbledore. Twinkling eyes. Lemon drops. For the greater good, Harry. Trust me, Harry. You must go back to the Dursleys, Harry. The floating orbs of light in the room flickered. Then they went out. Then they came back brighter than before, not blue anymore, but white gold, the color of Harry's magic when he stopped holding it back. Griptooth watched this with the expression of a goblin who was enjoying himself immensely. Mr. Potter, the old goblin said, I have not yet discussed the Pruitt complications, the Lestrange vault seizures, the illegal appropriation of Peveril properties by the ministry, or the 17 other instances of fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty that we have documented. But I suspect you have heard enough to make a decision. Harry turned around. The light in the room had settled, but his eyes were still bright, magic bleeding through, visible, crackling at the edges of his irises like emerald lightning. What decision? Griptooth pushed the box of rings across the table. Put them on. Claim your lordships. And let us begin collecting what is owed. Harry walked back to the table. He looked at Daphne. If I do this, he said, what happens? Legally. You become the most powerful lord in Britain. Every contract, debt, and obligation tied to these 15 houses becomes yours to enforce or dissolve. You can call in debts. You can freeze accounts. You can seize properties held under fraudulent contracts. You can demand a full accounting from every individual and institution that touched your estate. She paused. Practically. You're going to make a lot of very powerful people very, very angry. Good. He reached into the box and picked up the first ring. It was gold, heavy, stamped with a stag. Potter. The metal was warm against his fingers, and the moment his skin touched it, he felt something click, like a key turning in a lock he didn't know he had. The ring resized itself and slid onto his right index finger like it had been waiting 19 years to come home. He didn't hesitate after that. He picked them up one by one and put them on. Peveril, silver, stamped with the Deathly Hallows symbol, cold as winter. Right middle finger. Gryffindor, red gold, set with a ruby the color of fresh blood. Right ring finger. Slytherin, white gold and green enamel, stamped with a serpent. Left index finger. When he put this one on, he heard a hiss, not Parseltongue, something older. The ring spoke to him, and what it said was finally. Black, iron and obsidian, the black family crest in silver. Left middle finger. Gaunt, tarnished gold, the stone cracked but the magic intact. It went on his left ring finger beside Slytherin and the 2 rings hummed against each other like tuning forks finding harmony. Fleamont, copper and amber, warm and bright. Right thumb. Then the conquest rings, Lestrange, Rosier, Dollahav, dark metals, dark stones, magic that tasted like smoke and old blood. They went on his left hand, reshaping themselves to fit, stacking with an intelligence that shouldn't have been possible for pieces of metal. Crab, Goyle, Caro, Selwyn, smaller, simpler, vassal rings that knew their place and settled without fuss. And then there was one ring left in the box. Pruitt. Bronze, set with a garnet, stamped with 2 crossed wands. Harry picked it up and held it, feeling its weight. This one was going to hurt people he loved. Or people he'd thought loved him. He wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. He put it on. The 15th ring settled onto his right pinky finger and Harry's magic detonated. Not outward, inward. 15 bloodlines of magic crashed into him like 15 rivers finding the sea. The stone table cracked down the middle. The ledgers flew open, pages riffling in a wind that existed only inside the circle of Harry's power. Griptooth grabbed the edge of the table and held on, his black eyes wide for the first time in what was probably centuries. Daphne's chair slid back 3 feet and she gripped the armrests, her hair escaping its knot, her eyes huge but, Harry noticed even through the storm, not afraid. The rings blazed. Each one lit up in its own color, gold, silver, red, green, black, amber, bronze, until Harry's hands looked like they were covered in burning jewels. The magic pouring through him was immense, ancient, and aware. It knew him. It recognized him. 15 families, 15 bloodlines, 15 histories of magic stretching back 1,000 years, and they all said the same thing: you are ours. We are yours. Command us. And then it was over. The light faded. The wind died. The silence that followed was so complete that Harry could hear the faint dripping of water somewhere deep in the tunnels below. He looked at his hands. The rings sat quietly on his fingers, no longer glowing, looking almost ordinary. But he could feel them, each one a thread of connection to a vast web of magic, wealth, and power that stretched across the entire country. "Well," Daphne said. Her voice was slightly breathless. She smoothed her hair back into place with hands that barely trembled. That was dramatic. Harry surprised himself by laughing. It came out rough and short, but it was real. Griptooth was grinning. There was no other word for it. The old goblin was grinning, his knife teeth bared, his black eyes shining with something that looked remarkably like joy. 15 rings, Griptooth said. 15 lordships. In over 1,000 years of managing wizard wealth, I have never seen anything like this. He straightened his collar, which had been blown askew. Mr. Potter, Gringotts is honored to serve as your bank. And now, I believe, we have work to do. Harry sat back down. The cracked table groaned but held. Start with the Malfoys, he said. Every galleon. Every contract. Every fraudulent canute. I want it documented, packaged, and ready to present to the Wisengamot by. He looked at Daphne. How fast can you work? She arched one dark eyebrow. How fast do you need me to work? I want to walk into the Wisengamot tomorrow morning and claim my seats. When I do, I want every piece of financial fraud committed against my houses ready to present as evidence. I want injunctions prepared to freeze the Malfoy accounts. I want the Pruitt trust payments documented and ready for disclosure. And I want every vassal oath, debt, and obligation catalogued so that when someone tries to challenge my claims, I can bury them. Daphne stared at him for 3 seconds. Then the corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. That's roughly 200 hours of legal work. Can you do it? I can do it if you give me access to the Gringotts legal archives and 2 dictation quills. Griptooth. Done, the goblin said immediately. Ms. Greengrass will have everything she needs. I will also assign a team of 4 goblin archivists to assist. We are motivated. Harry could imagine. The goblins had spent centuries watching wizards defraud each other using Gringotts as the mechanism. They couldn't intervene, the treaties forbade it, unless the account holder authorized action. Harry was authorizing action. There's one more thing, Harry said. He looked at the cracked table, at the rings on his hands, and made a decision he hadn't planned on making. I want to contact Neville Longbottom. Tonight. Can you send a message? Griptooth raised a hairless eyebrow. Lord Longbottom. He's the only person I trust completely who also holds a Weissengemot seat. I'm going to need someone watching my back in that chamber. Consider it done. Harry nodded. Then he turned to Daphne. You've been sitting here for 3 weeks reading about how everyone I ever trusted was either lying to me or stealing from me. What's your honest assessment? Daphne set her quill down again and looked at him directly. No filters, no professional distance. My honest assessment is that you were treated as an asset, not a person. Dumbledore used your money to fund the war effort through back channels. I haven't proven it yet, but the pattern is there. The Malfoys treated your estate as a personal piggy bank. And the Weasley situation is the most complicated, because some of it was legal, some of it was grey, and the people involved are people you care about. She paused. My honest assessment is also that you are handling this remarkably well for someone who just found out he was robbed of approximately 4 million galleons. 4 million. Conservative estimate. It could be as high as 6, once we factor in compound interest, lost investment returns, and the appreciated value of seized properties. Harry closed his eyes for a moment. 4 million galleons. 6 million. Numbers so large they were almost abstract. Except they weren't abstract, they were his parents' legacy, the accumulated wealth of centuries, and it had been stripped away while he slept in a cupboard and wore hand-me-downs and thought he was lucky that a kind family with red hair had taken an interest in him. I'm not handling it well, he said quietly. I'm handling it usefully. There's a difference. Daphne looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not softened, sharpened. Like she'd been measuring him and he'd just exceeded the mark. Then let's get to work, she said. They worked through the morning. Griptooth brought in his archivists, 4 goblins who moved with the silent efficiency of surgeons, pulling ledgers, cross-referencing transactions, flagging irregularities. Daphne wrote with both hands, literally, using a paired set of dictation quills that transcribed her words onto 2 separate scrolls simultaneously while she manually annotated a third. Harry had never seen anyone work like that. It was, frankly, terrifying. Harry read everything they put in front of him. He had always been a quick study when he cared about the subject, and he had never cared about anything more than this. He learned to read Goblin financial notation in about 2 hours, which made the archivists mutter among themselves in gobbledygook with what sounded like grudging respect. By mid-morning, they had the Malfoy case assembled. It was devastating. Lucius Malfoy hadn't just skimmed off the Potter Trust, he'd used his position as trustee to systematically redirect Potter investments into Malfoy-controlled companies. He'd taken out loans in the Potter estate's name, secured by Potter properties, and funneled the loan proceeds into a network of shell accounts in Wizarding Switzerland. He'd charged the estate for services that were never rendered, security consultations, artifact appraisals, property management, all billed through Malfoy subsidiary companies. The total extraction was staggering, 1.7 million galleons over 17 years. But the truly brilliant part, the part that made Daphne's eyes narrow with something between outrage and admiration, was the self-reinforcing structure. Every theft made the Potter estate weaker and the Malfoy estate stronger, which gave Lucius more leverage to push through additional extractions. It was a vampire feeding on a sleeping patient, growing stronger with every sip while the patient grew weaker. He's quite good, Daphne murmured, reading a particularly complex chain of shell transactions. Loathsome, but good. Can we break it? We can annihilate it. Every single transaction was conducted under his authority as trustee. He had a fiduciary duty to act in your interest. He violated that duty roughly 400 times. Under the Weissengemot Civil Recovery Act, you're entitled to full restitution plus treble damages for proven fraud. Harry did the math. 1.7 million times 3 is 5.1 million. Plus interest. Plus legal costs. Plus punitive damages if the Weissengemot grants them, which they will, because Lucius Malfoy is not exactly popular right now. What does Malfoy actually have? Currently, Griptooth answered. The Malfoy estate, post-war, is valued at approximately 3.2 million galleons. They've spent heavily on legal defense, bribes, and lifestyle maintenance. They have liquid assets of roughly 800,000 galleons and property holdings worth the remainder. So if I claim treble damages, you bankrupt them completely. They cannot pay. Their estate would be seized, auctioned, and the proceeds awarded to you. Malfoy Manor, the investment portfolio, the art collection, everything. Harry let that sit for a moment. He thought about Draco. About the way Draco had lowered his wand on the astronomy tower. About the way Narcissa had lied to Voldemort's face to save her son. This wasn't about Draco. It wasn't about Narcissa. It was about Lucius, who had sat on a trust meant to protect an orphan and bled it dry. Prepare the claim, Harry said. Full restitution, treble damages, seizure of assets. Everything. Then they moved to the Weasleys. This was harder. Harry could feel it in the room, the archivists working more quietly, Daphne choosing her words more carefully, even Griptooth losing some of his predatory glee. The core of it was the trust stipend. 25,000 galleons over 17 years. Legal, technically. Ethical. Harry pictured Molly Weasley knitting him a Christmas jumper, and the image turned to ash in his mouth. But the stipend was only the beginning. The Pruitt lordship complicated things enormously. The Pruitt estate, Daphne said, spreading a set of parchments across the table, was not as wealthy as the Potters, but it was substantial. When Gideon and Fabian died, their estate entered a holding pattern, managed by Gringotts, generating income, waiting for a valid claimant. The estate currently holds approximately 400,000 galleons in liquid assets and another 200,000 in property. And no one claimed it. Molly couldn't, as I explained, she'd renounced her claims. She did, however, petition the Wisengamot to be named administrator of the estate in 1985. As administrator, she had authority to manage the properties and draw an administrative salary. How much? 3,000 galleons per year. Harry rubbed his face. So she was drawing from my estate and the Pruitt estate. There's more. Daphne's voice was careful now, walking him through it like someone navigating a minefield. As administrator, she authorized several transactions from the Pruitt estate that directly benefited the Weasley family. A loan of 50,000 galleons to fund an expansion of the borough, never repaid. Payment of Hogwarts tuition for William, Charles, and Percy Weasley from the Pruitt Education Fund. And a series of smaller disbursements, 1,000 here, 2,000 there, coded as family maintenance and drawn against the Pruitt household accounts. Total. Over 17 years. Approximately 110,000 galleons from the Pruitt estate, in addition to the 25,000 from the Potter Trust. 135,000 galleons. Not the millions Lucius had taken. But to the Weasleys, a family that had spent decades performing poverty while quietly drawing on two separate estates, it was everything. Did Arthur know? Harry asked again. I can't prove it either way. But the borough loan required 2 signatures. His is on the document. Something hot and tight coiled in Harry's chest. Not rage, something worse. Disappointment. The bone-deep, soul-bruising kind that comes when you realize the people who made you feel like family were, at least in part, paying for the privilege with your own money. The question, Daphne said, watching him closely, is what you want to do about it. Harry was quiet for a long time. The goblin archivists waited. Griptooth waited. Daphne waited. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic clank of the Gringotts cart system far above them. I want it all documented, Harry said finally. I want every transaction, every payment, every signature on a file. I want it ready. But I'm not filing a fraud claim against the Weasleys. Daphne blinked. You're not. Not today. Today I'm claiming the Pruitt lordship, which is my right. That automatically terminates Molly's administrator status and gives me control of the Pruitt estate. I'm calling in the borough loan, which is my right, it's owed to the Pruitt estate and it's 17 years overdue. And I'm ending the Potter Trust stipend, which should have ended when I turned 17. And the rest? The rest depends on what Molly does when she finds out. If she comes to me honestly, we'll work something out. If she fights it, if she lies, or denies it, or tries to play the victim. He met Daphne's eyes. Then I'll treat her the same as Lucius. Daphne nodded slowly. There was respect in it, not the sycophantic kind Harry was used to, but the real kind. The kind you give to someone who could burn the world down and chooses to use a scalpel instead. That's smart, she said. Strategically and ethically. I'm not being ethical. I'm being precise. Neville arrived at 3 in the afternoon. He came through the deep doors of Griptooth's office like he'd been born underground, no hesitation, no wide-eyed gawking at the ancient vaults. He'd filled out since the war. Not just physically, though that too, he was broad-shouldered now, tan from greenhouse work, with hands that looked like they could crush walnuts. But it was the way he carried himself that had really changed. Neville Longbottom walked like a man who had killed a Horcrux with a sword and didn't need to talk about it. He looked at Harry. He looked at the rings. He looked at the cracked table and the mountains of parchment and the 4 goblin archivists and Daphne Greengrass, who was on her 8th hour of continuous legal work and showed no signs of slowing down. So, Neville said. What did I miss? Harry told him. All of it. He didn't soften it or dress it up, he laid out the lordships, the theft, the Malfoys, the Weasleys, the whole bloody mess. Neville listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change much, but Harry saw his hands tighten on the arms of his chair when the Dumbledore Trust came up, and his jaw set when Harry described the Pruitt situation. When Harry finished, Neville was quiet for a minute. You need someone in the Wisengamot chamber backing your play, Neville said. It wasn't a question. I need someone I trust. You've got him. Neville leaned forward. What's the plan for tomorrow? Daphne answered. She'd been listening while she worked, which Harry was starting to realize was simply how she operated, processing on multiple tracks simultaneously, missing nothing. He walks in and claims his seats. All 15. He presents the documented evidence of fraud against the Malfoy estate and moves for immediate injunction, freezing their accounts pending a full hearing. He claims the Pruitt lordship, which terminates the existing administration and calls in outstanding debts. All of this is his legal right and none of it requires a vote. But someone will challenge it, Neville said. Of course they will. Lucius will have a proxy in the chamber, probably Greengrass Sr., actually, which is awkward for me professionally but irrelevant legally. The Weasley bloc will object to the Pruitt claim. The old families will object on general principle because they're terrified of anyone holding this much power. The challenge will be weathering the storm long enough to get the formal claims recorded. And once they're recorded, they're unassailable. Magical law is absolute on lordship claims. Once the rings accept you and the Wisengamot record acknowledges it, no force on earth can undo it. The financial claims are slightly more vulnerable to legal challenge, but with the evidence we have. She gestured at the mountains of parchment. They don't have a prayer. Neville looked at Harry. You're sure about this? All of it? I'm sure. Even the Weasleys? I'm not destroying the Weasleys, Neville. I'm claiming what's mine and ending arrangements that should have ended years ago. What happens after that is up to them. Neville studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, decisively. Right. I'll be in the chamber at 8. House Longbottom stands with House Potter. Again. He said that last word with a small, crooked grin, and for just a second, Harry felt something warm cut through the cold fury that had been building in him all day. He still had people who mattered. He still had people who were real. The afternoon bled into evening. Neville stayed, helping where he could, mostly by being an immovable presence of calm while Harry and Daphne worked. They ate dinner at the stone table, goblin cuisine, which turned out to be surprisingly good if you didn't think too hard about the ingredients, and kept working. At 9 o'clock, Daphne put down her quill, stretched her neck, and said, "It's done." Harry looked up from a property deed he'd been reviewing. "All of it?" "The Malfoy injunction filing. The lordship claims. The Pruitt transfer. The evidence packets for the Weisengomot. The formal notifications that will be delivered to affected parties at sunrise." She began stacking parchments into organized bundles with the practiced efficiency of someone who could do this in her sleep. 15 lordship claims, for financial fraud charges, 2 estate transfers, 1 loan recall, and 17 subpoenas for records from the ministry's financial archives. All in one day. "You said you wanted it done." "I did." "And you did it." He paused. "Thank you." Daphne paused in her stacking. She looked at him, and for the first time all day, something unguarded flickered across her face. Not quite warmth, Daphne didn't do warmth, not yet, but something real. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me after tomorrow, when you're sitting in 15 chairs and the entire Weisengomot is trying to figure out how a half-blood orphan just became the most powerful lord in the country." "I don't plan to sit in 15 chairs. That seems physically impractical." She didn't quite laugh, but her eyes changed. "Get some sleep, Potter. You're going to need it." He didn't sleep. He went back to Grimmauld Place and sat in the drawing room with the black family tapestry on the wall and 15 rings on his fingers and the knowledge of everything that had been done to him burning in his chest like a coal that would never go out. He thought about writing to Ron. Thought about it for almost an hour, composing and discarding letters in his head. "Dear Ron, it turns out your mum has been lying to us both. Dear Ron, I'm about to do something that might end our friendship. Dear Ron, I'm sorry." He didn't write the letter. There was nothing he could say that would make tomorrow easier. Either their friendship would survive it or it wouldn't, and no amount of words would change which way that coin landed. Instead, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at himself. The rings caught the light, 15 points of gold and silver and bronze, 15 anchors tying him to a legacy he'd never known existed. He didn't look like the boy who'd lived. He didn't look like the chosen one or the man who conquered or any of the other ridiculous titles the prophet had pinned on him. He looked like a man who'd been told the truth and decided to do something about it. Harry turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. He was up before dawn. Black coffee, black robes, proper lordship robes, delivered by Griptooth's courier overnight, cut from fabric so dark it seemed to drink the light. They fit perfectly, because of course they did. Goblin tailoring. He fastened the cloak with a platinum clasp that bore no single family crest but instead a new design, 15 sigils arranged in a circle around a central point. The point was empty. His own mark. His own choice. He apparat to the ministry at 7:30. The atrium was quiet, too early for most workers, too early for the press. He walked past the security desk, and the wizard on duty glanced at him, did a double take at the rings, and went pale. "Lord." The wizard started, then apparently couldn't figure out which name to use. "Lord Potter." "That'll do," Harry said, and kept walking. Daphne was waiting outside the Weisengomot chamber. She'd changed too, her robes were still charcoal but more formal, with the silver insignia of a licensed solicitor on her collar. Her hair was back in its severe knot. She held a leather satchel that Harry knew contained enough legal firepower to level a small government. "You look like you're going to war," she said. "Aren't I?" She considered this. "You're going to a committee meeting where you happen to be holding all the weapons. It's only a war if they're stupid enough to fight." Neville appeared around the corner, wearing the long-bottom lordship robes, deep green with brown trim. He gave Harry a nod. "The chamber's filling up," Neville said. "Word got out. I don't know how, but there are 40 lords and ladies in there already, and the session doesn't start for 30 minutes. Good, Harry said. Let them see me coming. He looked at Daphne. She looked back. She opened the satchel, took out a single parchment, the formal claim filing, and handed it to him. Whenever you're ready, Lord Potter. Harry took the parchment. He rolled his shoulders once, felt the 15 rings hum against his skin, and walked toward the doors of the Wisengamot. Behind him, the wards of the ministry shivered. Just once. Just enough to notice. As if the building itself was bracing for impact. Good, Harry thought. It should be. Chapter 2, The Wisengamot. The doors of the Wisengamot chamber were 20 feet of enchanted oak, carved with the faces of every chief warlock since the chamber's founding. They were meant to intimidate. Harry pushed them open with one hand and didn't slow down. The chamber was a vast stone amphitheater, tiered seats rising in concentric semicircles around a central floor, the ceiling lost in shadow, the air heavy with old magic and older politics. Floating candles provided a warm, deceptive light that made everything look civilized. The Wisengamot crest hung behind the chief warlock's elevated bench, scales, wand, and the motto Justitia Magica Aeterna, which Harry had always thought was ironic for an institution that had sent Sirius to Azkaban without a trial. 40-odd lords and ladies were already seated. Neville hadn't been wrong, word had spread. Harry recognized faces. Augusta Longbottom in the Longbottom box, ramrod straight, her vulture hat casting a shadow like a bird of prey. Cyrus Greengrass, Daphne's father, in the Greengrass seat, his expression carefully neutral. Amelia Bones's niece Susan, who had inherited the Bones seat after the war, looking young and alert. The Wisengamot scribe, a hunched wizard named Phelps, was already writing furiously, quill scratching across parchment before anything had even happened. And in the Malfoy box, not Draco, not Lucius, but a solicitor Harry didn't recognize. A thin man with a thin mouth and thin fingers, dressed in robes so expensive they practically screamed. He had a stack of parchment in front of him and the watchful stillness of a snake in tall grass. Lucius's proxy. There was no Weasley in the Weasley seat. The seat was empty. Arthur was at work, Harry assumed, and didn't yet know what was coming. Harry walked down the center aisle. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He simply walked, and the chamber went quiet around him like a pond going still when something large moves beneath the surface. The rings were visible. He hadn't hidden them. 15 rings on his fingers, catching the candlelight, and every witch and wizard in the room saw them. Harry watched the reactions ripple outward, confusion, then recognition, then disbelief, then something closer to fear. Cyrus Greengrass gripped the arm of his chair. Augusta Longbottom's eyes went sharp as flint. The Malfoy proxy sat forward so fast his parchment slid. Harry reached the central floor and stopped. Daphne took a position at the solicitor's podium to his left. Neville was already in the Longbottom box, his presence an anchor. The chief warlock's bench was occupied by Tiberius Ogden, ancient, whiskered, and generally regarded as the least offensive compromise candidate after the war had cleared out half the chamber's leadership. He peered down at Harry with watery blue eyes and an expression that suggested he'd been expecting a quiet morning. The chamber recognizes. Ogden started, then faltered. His eyes moved across the rings. His mouth opened and closed twice. The chamber recognizes Harry James Potter, who presents himself for formal claim of lordship, Harry said. His voice carried without effort. The chamber's acoustics were designed for it, but Harry's magic was doing something to the air, not a spell, not intentionally, just the weight of 15 houses pressing outward. 15 claims. I have the documentation. He held up the parchment Daphne had given him. The silence broke. 15. That was Amos Diggory. 3 rose up, his face a mask of incredulity. That's absurd. That's not possible. 15, echoed Elphia's doge from the back row. In all my years, order, Ogden said, though he didn't sound like he believed in the concept. Mr. Potter, Lord Potter, the process for claiming a single lordship involves, I'm familiar with the process, Chief Warlock. My solicitor has prepared the individual claim documents for each of the 15 lordships. Each claim is supported by blood verification conducted at Gringotts, magical resonance confirmation from the lordship rings themselves, and the relevant genealogical and legal documentation. Harry turned to Daphne. Ms. Greengrass? Daphne opened her satchel. She began pulling out parchment bundles, not one at a time, but in a continuous, efficient stream, each bundle bound with a different colored ribbon, each one labeled, tabbed, and cross-referenced. She set them on the solicitor's podium and they formed a stack nearly 2 feet high. The chamber watched in the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for slow-moving natural disasters. 15 lordship claims, Daphne said, her voice cool and precise and filling the room without strain. Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, Gaunt, Fleamont, Lestrange, Rosier, Dolohov, Crabbe, Goyle, Carrow, Selwyn, and Pruitt. Each claim package includes, certified blood analysis from Gringotts Inheritance Division, magical resonance confirmation signed by Senior Account Manager Griptooth, complete genealogical documentation tracing the line of inheritance, and, where applicable, right of conquest certification from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She looked up at Ogden. Under Section 47 of the Wisengamot Charter, a lordship claim supported by ring acceptance and blood verification is prima facie valid and must be recorded unless successfully challenged within the session. I move for immediate recording of all 15 claims. The chamber erupted. Not into violence, into noise. 40 voices talking at once, some shouting, some demanding points of order, some simply expressing disbelief at volume. Harry stood in the center of it and waited. He caught Neville's eye. Neville gave him a small nod. I'm here. Order. Ogden banged his gavel hard enough to crack it. Order, or I will clear this chamber. The noise subsided to a hostile murmur. Lord Potter, you must understand, a claim of this magnitude is without precedent. The chamber has the right to examine each claim individually. Absolutely, Harry said. Which claim would you like to start with? Ogden looked like a man who'd asked for a glass of water and been offered the ocean. He turned to the scribe. Phelps, the standard verification procedure, if you please. Phelps stood, adjusting his spectacles. The standard procedure is for the claimant to present his ring to the chamber and submit to a magical verification charm. If the ring confirms the bond, the claim is valid. If not, the ring, well, it usually removes the claimant's finger. Charming tradition, Harry said. Let's do all 15. At once? Phelps squeaked. Unless you'd prefer to do them one at a time and be here until Thursday. A ripple of nervous laughter. Harry raised his right hand. Phelps drew his wand with the care of a man defusing a bomb and cast the verification charm, a complex thing, all silver light and spiraling runes. It hit the Potter ring first. The ring flared gold. A beam of light shot from it to the Potter seat in the chamber, an ornate chair in the third row that had been empty since James Potter's death. The seat's carved armrests glowed in response. Potter claim confirmed, Phelps said, his quill writing automatically. Shall I? The Peveril ring activated before he could finish. Silver light, connecting to a seat so old and dusty it looked like part of the wall. Then Gryffindor, red gold, blazing, connecting to a seat near the top of the chamber that Harry hadn't even noticed, half hidden behind a pillar, covered in cobwebs. No one had sat in it in living memory. The rings went off in sequence, each one brighter than the last, beams of light crisscrossing the chamber like a web being spun in real time. Slytherin lit up green and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Black was a pulse of darkness that made the candles gutter. The conquest rings, Lestrange, Rosier, Dolohov, crackled with something angry and electric, their seats responding with grudging, sullen light. And then Pruitt. Bronze light, warm as autumn, reaching across the chamber to a seat in the fourth row. The seat that sat right next to the Weasley box. Every ring. Every seat. 15 beams of light connecting Harry Potter to 15 chairs in the Wizengamot like threads in a spider's web, and he was the spider at the center. Phelps had stopped writing. He was staring. All 15 claims confirmed, he managed. The record shows. Lord Harry James Potter holds valid lordship of houses Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, Gaunt, Fleamont, Lestrange, Rosier, Dolohov, Crabbe, Goyle, Carrow, Selwyn, and Pruitt. He looked up at Ogden with an expression of complete helplessness. That's 15 Wizengamot seats, Chief Warlock. We can count, Phelps, Ogden said faintly. Harry turned to face the chamber. 15 beams of light still connected him to 15 seats, and his magic was singing, not aggressively, not threateningly, but present. Every person in the room could feel it. The weight of it. The scope of it. I formally claim my seats, Harry said. All 15. And I have additional business for the chamber. Additional business, Ogden repeated, in the voice of a man watching a boulder roll toward him. I wish to bring formal charges of financial fraud against the Malfoy estate and to file for immediate injunctive relief freezing all Malfoy accounts and assets pending investigation. The Malfoy proxy was on his feet before Harry finished the sentence. Point of order, the thin man said. His voice was smooth and clipped and practiced, a professional speaker, a professional obstacle. My name is Augustus Finch Fletchley, representing the noble and most ancient house of Malfoy. Lord Malfoy, which Lord Malfoy? Harry asked. Lucius is under house arrest and stripped of his seat. Draco hasn't claimed the lordship. Who exactly are you representing? Finch Fletchley's thin mouth thinned further. I represent the Malfoy family's legal interests, as authorized by Lady Narcissa Malfoy. Noted. Continue. The charges Lord Potter wishes to bring require formal filing with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, not the Wizengamot. This chamber is a legislative body, not a courtroom. Daphne stepped forward. Section 12, subsection C of the Wizengamot Charter, in matters of hereditary fraud involving sitting or former members of the Wizengamot, the Chief Warlock may authorize an emergency hearing upon presentation of prima facie evidence, particularly where the integrity of the body's financial oversight is in question. The fraud I'm about to present was committed by a Wizengamot member using Wizengamot-administered trusts. This chamber isn't just appropriate, it's the required venue. Finch Fletchley opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The chair will need to review the evidence before, Ogden began. The evidence is ready for review, Daphne said, and pulled the first bundle from her stack. Red ribbon. The Malfoy file. She sent it floating up to Ogden's bench with a flick of her wand. I'd encourage the Chief Warlock to start with page 17, which documents the first of approximately 400 separate fiduciary violations. Ogden took the bundle. He opened it to page 17. He read for about 30 seconds. His face went the color of old parchment. Merlin's teeth, he whispered. The rest is worse, Daphne said helpfully. Ogden read for another minute, flipping pages with increasing speed. The chamber was silent, 40+ witches and wizards watching their Chief Warlock turn progressively greener. Finally, he set the bundle down. This evidence, if verified, describes systematic fraud on a scale I have never encountered in 60 years of legal practice. He looked at Harry. Lord Potter, you are aware of the gravity of these charges? Deeply aware. And you can verify the provenance of this evidence? Every document in that bundle was sourced from Gringotts Financial Archives, certified by Senior Account Manager Griptooth, and independently verified by Ms. Greengrass. Gringotts has provided a blanket authentication under the Goblin Verification Seal, which, as I'm sure Mr. Finch Fletchley knows, is considered incontrovertible evidence under magical law. Finch Fletchley knew. Harry could see it in the way the blood drained from his face. Goblin verification seals couldn't be forged, couldn't be challenged, and couldn't be disputed. The goblins staked their institutional honor on them, and any goblin who issued a false seal was executed by their own people. It was, quite simply, the most reliable form of evidence in the magical world. "I authorize an emergency hearing," Ogden said. His voice had steadied. Whatever else he was, Tiberius Ogden was a career jurist, and the scent of genuine fraud had snapped something professional into place behind his watery eyes. "Lord Potter, present your case. Mr. Finch-Fletchley, you may respond. The chamber will hear evidence and determine whether injunctive relief is warranted." Harry stepped aside and let Daphne take the floor. She was extraordinary. Harry had watched skilled people work before, Dumbledore with magic, Snape with potions, McGonagall with transfiguration. Daphne Greengrass with legal documents was in the same category. She didn't just present evidence, she constructed a narrative. She started with the establishment of the Potter Trust in 1982, walking the chamber through Dumbledore's actions with clinical precision, laying out the structure of the three-person board, Dumbledore, Malfoy, and the third trustee whose identity she hadn't yet revealed. She described the trust's legitimate function, its intended purpose, its safeguards. Then she started pulling the threads. "The first irregularity occurs in March 1983, Daphne said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "A transfer of 12,000 galleons from the Potter Trust to Malfoy Brokerage Ltd for investment management services. The standard rate for such services at the time was 4% of assets under management. Malfoy Brokerage charged 15%. No competitive bid was solicited. No alternative provider was considered. The transfer was approved by Lucius Malfoy in his capacity as trustee, voting on a contract that directly enriched his own company." She paused to let that sink in. This is not an isolated incident. Over the next 17 years, Lucius Malfoy approved 387 separate transactions that transferred Potter Trust funds to Malfoy-controlled entities. I will not read all 387 into the record, because we would be here for a week, but the pattern is clear and consistent: inflated fees, no-bid contracts, self-dealing at every turn. The total extraction, documented, verified, and sealed by Gringotts, is 1.7 million galleons. A gasp from the chamber. Not dramatic, genuine. 1.7 million galleons was an obscene amount of money, even by the standards of people who sat in gilded chairs and voted on the governance of nations. But the self-dealing is only half the picture, Daphne continued. She was pacing now, controlled, precise steps that kept the chamber's attention tracking with her like spectators at a tennis match. The other half is front-running. For those unfamiliar with the term, front-running is the practice of using advanced knowledge of a client's planned trades to make personal trades that profit from the client's market impact. It is illegal under the Magical Securities Act of 1911. It is also very difficult to prove, because it requires demonstrating that the trader had access to non-public information. She stopped pacing. In this case, Lucius Malfoy was literally sitting on the board that approved the trades. He had complete access. And our records show, with Goblin verification, that Malfoy personal accounts made purchases of specific magical commodities within 48 hours before the Potter Trust purchased those same commodities, on 212 separate occasions over 17 years. The statistical probability of this occurring by chance is approximately 1 in 10 to the 97th power. To put that in perspective, there are only 10 to the 80th atoms in the observable universe. Finch-Fletchley had stopped writing notes. His quill was motionless in his hand. His face had the carefully blank expression of a professional who knew, with absolute certainty, that his client was going to lose. "Conservative estimate of profits from front-running," Daphne said. 400,000 galleons. Combined with direct extraction, 2.1 million galleons. Under the Civil Recovery Act, Lord Potter is entitled to full restitution plus treble damages for proven fraud. That's 6.3 million galleons. She let the number hang in the air. The current estimated value of the Malfoy estate is 3.2 million galleons. She didn't need to do the math for them. Every person in the room could see it. The Malfoys owed roughly twice what they had. They were, by any reasonable definition, already bankrupt, they just didn't know it yet. Lord Potter moves for immediate injunctive relief, Daphne said. Freezing all Malfoy accounts, assets, and properties pending a full hearing on damages. The evidence of fraud is clear, verified, and uncontested. Without an injunction, there is an obvious risk that the Malfoy family will attempt to move, hide, or destroy assets before judgment can be rendered. She returned to the solicitor's podium. The floor is Mr. Finch-Fletchley's. Finch-Fletchley stood. He straightened his robes. He looked at his notes. He looked at the chamber. He looked at Harry, who looked back at him without expression. The Malfoy family categorically denies all allegations of fraud, Finch-Fletchley said. His voice was steady, which Harry respected. The man was a professional taking a beating and maintaining his composure. The transactions described by Ms. Greengrass were conducted within the normal parameters of trust management. Commission rates were reflective of the premium services provided by Malfoy brokerage. The statistical analysis of trading patterns is circumstantial and, is Mr. Finch-Fletchley challenging the Goblin verification seal? Daphne asked from the podium, without looking up from her notes. Dead silence. Challenging a Goblin verification seal was theoretically possible. It was also roughly equivalent to walking into Gringotts and spitting on the floor. The Goblins took it personally, institutionally, and, historically, violently. No, Finch-Fletchley said, after a pause that lasted a beat too long. The Malfoy family does not challenge the Goblin verification seal. However, we contend that the interpretation of the verified documents is subject to dispute, and that a full hearing, with adequate time for the defense to prepare, is required before any injunctive relief can be granted. How much time? Ogden asked. 60 days. Denied, Harry said from the floor. Ogden blinked. Lord Potter, the chair determines, Chief Warlock, 60 days is enough time for Lucius Malfoy to move every Canute he has into untraceable accounts. He's done it before, in 1996, when the Ministry investigated him after the Department of Mysteries incident, he transferred 400,000 galleons to a Zurich vault in under a week. It's in the file. Ogden looked at the file. He found the relevant page. His expression tightened. The chair will allow 1 week for the defense to prepare for a full hearing. In the interim, the injunction is granted. All Malfoy accounts and assets are frozen effective immediately, pending resolution. The gavel came down. Finch-Fletchley sat. He began writing furiously, damage control, Harry assumed. Messages to Narcissa. Messages to Lucius. Messages to whatever financial wizards the Malfoys had on retainer, telling them to stop answering their owls because it was already too late. Harry felt something settle in him. Not satisfaction, not yet. Something more like a will clicking into the next gear. One down. The hardest part was still coming. He caught Daphne's eye. She gave him the smallest nod. Ready when you are. Chief Warlock, Harry said. I have one additional matter for the chamber. Ogden looked at him like a man watching lightning strike the same tree twice. Of course you do. I wish to formally activate the Pruitt lordship and assume control of the Pruitt estate, as is my right as the confirmed Lord Pruitt. This, Harry knew, was where it got complicated. The Malfoy case was clean, clear fraud, overwhelming evidence, an unsympathetic defendant. The Pruitt situation was a knife made of broken glass. Wherever he gripped it, someone was going to bleed. He could feel the chamber's energy shift. The Malfoy injunction had been dramatic but impersonal, most of these lords and ladies had no love for the Malfoys. The Pruitt claim was different. The Weasleys were Order of Merlin holders. Heroes of the war. Sympathetic figures in a way the Malfoys would never be. And what Harry was about to do would look, to anyone who didn't know the full story, like a betrayal. The Pruitt lordship, Ogden said carefully, has been in administrative holding for 18 years. The current administrator is Molly Weasley née Pruitt, Harry said. Appointed in 1985. Her administration is automatically terminated upon the claim of a valid lord. I am that lord. The ring confirmed it. The claim is valid. Murmuring in the chamber. Heads turning. People looking at the empty Weasley seat, at each other, at Harry. This is unprecedented, someone said from the upper tiers. Harry didn't see who. Lord Potter already holds 14 seats. The Pruitt lordship has been administered by the Weasley family for nearly 2 decades. To simply claim it, is my legal right, Harry said. The ring chose me. I didn't choose the ring. If anyone in this chamber would like to try it on and see if it agrees, they're welcome to. He held up his right hand, the Pruitt ring glinting bronze on his pinky. Fair warning, if it rejects you, you lose the finger. No volunteers. Daphne spoke up. For the record, Lord Potter is not contesting Mrs. Weasley's administration retroactively. He is simply activating the lordship, which supersedes any administrative appointment. This is black-letter law. Section 22 of the Hereditary Estates Act. There is also the matter of outstanding debts owed to the Pruitt estate, Harry said. He kept his voice level. This was the part he'd rehearsed in his head a dozen times, trying to find the version that was honest without being cruel. As Lord Pruitt, I have reviewed the estate's accounts. There is a loan of 50,000 galleons issued in 1989 to Arthur and Molly Weasley, secured against the borough property, with a repayment term of 10 years. The loan is currently 7 years past due. I am formally calling in that debt. Now the chamber reacted. Not with gasps this time, with noise. Angry noise, confused noise, disbelieving noise. Harry heard someone say, "the borough," in a tone of outrage, and someone else say, "Harry Potter is foreclosing on the Weasleys," in a tone of delicious scandal. "Order," Ogden said, and this time he meant it. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Lord Potter, you understand the implications of calling in this debt. If the Weasley family cannot pay, I understand the implications. I also understand that the loan was issued from an estate I now control, that it is 7 years overdue, and that I am well within my rights to call it in. I am not foreclosing on anything. I am requesting repayment of a legitimate debt. The Weasley family has 30 days to make arrangements." 30 days, Ogden repeated. 30 days. Which is more than generous, given that the loan was supposed to be repaid 7 years ago. Harry could feel the room turning. Half the chamber was looking at him with something between admiration and fear, the old pure-blood families, the ones who understood debt and obligation and the cold machinery of hereditary finance. The other half was looking at him with horror, the progressives, the Order sympathizers, the people who saw the Weasleys as untouchable heroes. Good. Let them all watch. Let them see that justice wasn't a thing you applied selectively based on who your friends were. The door to the chamber banged open. Ron Weasley stood in the doorway. He was in his Auror trainee robes, his face flushed, his chest heaving like he'd sprinted from the training floor. His eyes found Harry immediately, and the expression on his face was something Harry had seen before, in the tent, during the Horcrux hunt, when Ron had come back. Confusion and betrayal and anger and love, all tangled together in a knot that couldn't be untied without cutting something. "Harry," Ron said. "What the hell are you doing?" The chamber went silent. Every eye moved between Harry and Ron like spectators at a duel. Harry looked at his best friend. His oldest friend. The first person his own age who'd ever been kind to him, sitting across from him on the Hogwarts Express with chocolate on his face and a rat in his pocket. "I'm claiming what's mine, Ron. By going after my family. In front of the whole bloody Wisengamot. I didn't go after your family. I claimed a lordship and called in a debt. A real debt. One your parents took out and never repaid. Ron's jaw worked. You could have told me. You could have warned me. Instead I hear about it from Dawlish, who heard it from someone who heard it in the corridor, and I run down here to find you standing in front of the whole chamber. You're right. Harry said it simply, without defensiveness. I should have told you. I tried to figure out how. I couldn't. Because the thing I would have had to tell you is that your mum has been drawing a stipend from my estate for 17 years, and she never told you, and she never told me, and I only found out yesterday. The silence after that was a living thing. Ron stared at him. What are you talking about? Molly Weasley was named as a trustee of my estate by Dumbledore in 1981. She received 1,500 galleons per year, every year, from the Potter Trust as compensation. She also administered the Pruitt estate and drew 3,000 galleons per year from that. She authorized a 50,000 galleon loan from the Pruitt estate to your family that was never repaid. All of this is documented. All of it is verified. Ron's face had gone white. Not angry white. Shock white. The color of someone whose ground has just shifted beneath their feet. That's not, Mom wouldn't, I have the documents, Ron. I have her signatures. I have the bank records. Harry's voice was steady but there was something underneath it, a crack, a fissure, visible only to someone who knew him as well as Ron did. I didn't want this. I didn't go looking for it. But it's real, and I can't pretend it isn't. Ron looked around the chamber. 40+ faces staring back at him. The scribe writing every word. The whole ugly mess playing out in public, which was exactly what Harry had wanted to avoid, which was exactly what had happened anyway, because the universe had a cruel sense of timing. You should have come to me first, Ron said. His voice was thick. Before any of this. Before the Wisengamot, before the claims, before the, you should have come to me first, Harry. I know. Then why didn't you? Harry looked at him for a long moment. The chamber was utterly still. Because I was afraid you'd talk me out of it. Ron flinched. It was barely visible, a tightening around the eyes, a micro-movement of the shoulders, but Harry saw it, and he knew Ron understood. Not accepted. Not forgave. Understood. Harry had been afraid that his loyalty to Ron would override his right to the truth, and that fear had driven him to act first and explain later, and both things were real and neither one was entirely wrong. Lord Potter, Ogden said quietly. Do you wish to continue? Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. The claims stand, Harry said. The debt is called. 30 days. Ron turned and walked out of the chamber. He didn't slam the door. He didn't say another word. He just walked out, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Harry breathed. In. Out. He locked the feeling away, not gone, not forgotten, just stored somewhere it couldn't break his focus. He had a war to finish. Chief Warlock, he said. I believe we need to discuss the allocation of my 15 seats. The next 2 hours were procedural hell, and Harry let Daphne navigate most of it while he occupied his mind with the mechanics and kept the image of Ron's face locked in its box. The seat allocation was straightforward in theory, 15 lordships, 15 seats, 15 votes. In practice, it triggered a cascade of complications that the Wisengamot Charter had never been designed to handle. Could one lord hold 15 seats simultaneously? Precedent said yes, Aldrich the Vast had held 9. But 15 was nearly a quarter of the chamber's total voting power, and several lords immediately moved to invoke a concentration limit. Daphne dismantled them. The Wisengamot Charter contains no provision for limiting the number of seats held by a single lord, she said, standing at the podium with the calm authority of someone who had memorized the entire charter and was daring anyone to prove otherwise. The charter was written by the founders specifically to allow for the consolidation of power through legitimate means, blood, conquest, and legal inheritance. The founders believed that the magical weight of multiple lordships would naturally limit how many one wizard could hold. They did not anticipate Lord Potter, but their system works exactly as designed. The rings chose him. The seats are his. But the balance of power, someone started, is exactly as unbalanced as the magic dictates, Daphne said. If you'd like to propose an amendment to the charter, you're welcome to. You'll need a 2/3 majority. Lord Potter currently holds 15 of 67 seats. I'd suggest doing the arithmetic before you try. No one tried. The seats were allocated. Harry formally took possession of all 15, which involved a somewhat absurd ceremony where he had to touch each seat with his wand and speak the house name. By the time he'd worked his way around the chamber, climbing over rows, squeezing past disapproving lords, accidentally stepping on Elphia's Doja's foot, the gravity of the morning had given way to something almost farcical. Harry caught Neville's eye during the Caro seat ceremony, and Neville's mouth was twitching so hard it looked like he was having a medical episode. But the absurdity faded when Harry returned to the central floor and faced the chamber with 15 seats glowing behind him, each one connected to him by a thread of magic that pulsed visibly in the candlelight. 15 seats, Ogden said, for the record. Lord Potter holds 15 seats. Combined with allied seats, Lord Longbottom, are you declaring an alliance? House Longbottom stands with House Potter, Neville said. 2 seats. 17 seats in alliance. Does anyone else wish to declare? Silence. Then, from the back of the chamber, a voice Harry didn't expect. House Bones stands with House Potter. Susan Bones. She was standing in her family's box, chin up, voice clear. Harry looked at her in surprise, and she met his gaze with the steady determination of a woman who'd lost her entire family to the war Lucius Malfoy had helped finance. 18 seats, Ogden recorded. Another voice. House Abbott stands with House Potter. Hannah Abbott's mother, in the Abbott box. 19. House Macmillan stands with House Potter. Ernie's father, gruff and decisive. 20. It was happening. Harry could feel it, the momentum, the tide turning, the chamber realigning itself around a new center of gravity. 20 seats, and climbing. The old guard was watching their monopoly crack. Cyrus Greengrass rose. The chamber turned to him. Daphne went very still at the podium. House Greengrass, Cyrus said, his face absolutely unreadable, declares neutrality. We stand with no faction at this time. Daphne's expression didn't change. But Harry saw her fingers tighten on the podium's edge, just for a second, just enough to whiten the knuckles, before she relaxed. That was interesting. And complicated. And a problem for later. The declarations continued. When the dust settled, Harry's bloc held 22 seats, 15 of his own plus 7 allies. The conservative opposition, the old families who hadn't declared, held roughly 20. The remaining seats were neutral, absent, or belonged to people who were currently trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. 22 seats. The largest voting bloc in the Wizardgamot. Not a majority, he'd need 34 for that, but enough to block any legislation he didn't like and push through anything that only needed a plurality. In one morning, Harry Potter had become the most powerful political figure in magical Britain. Ogden adjourned the session at noon. Harry's ears were ringing. He had a headache building behind his eyes that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the fact that he'd been operating at full intensity for 5 hours straight. Daphne appeared at his elbow as he left the chamber floor. She didn't touch him, Daphne wasn't a touching person, but she walked close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. That went well, she said. Ron was always going to react that way. You knew that. Don't second-guess it now. She was right. He had known. It didn't help. They emerged from the chamber into the corridor outside, and immediately Harry understood why the session had felt slightly muffled toward the end. The corridor was packed. Ministry workers, reporters, gawkers, and at least a dozen people Harry didn't recognize, all pressed against the corridor walls by a line of Aurors who were doing their best to maintain order and failing. The cameras hit him first, flash after flash, the magical kind that left purple afterimages. Then the shouting. "Lord Potter! Lord Potter! Is it true you hold 15 seats, Lord Potter? Can you comment on the Malfoy injunction, Lord Potter? Is it true you're foreclosing on the Weasleys?" "No comment," Daphne said, loud enough to cut through the noise. "Lord Potter will issue a formal statement this afternoon. No questions at this time." She steered Harry through the crowd with a hand that wasn't quite touching his back, hovering an inch away, guiding by proximity alone. They made it to the lifts. The doors closed. The noise cut off. Harry leaned against the lift wall and closed his eyes. "You need food," Daphne said. "And about 10 minutes where no one is looking at you. I need Ron to not hate me. You need food first. Emotional crises are better handled on a full stomach. Trust me, I'm a solicitor." He opened his eyes. She was standing against the opposite wall, arms crossed, watching him with that evaluating expression that he was starting to realize was just her face. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more. Slytherin. I am exactly as Slytherin as I need to be. Right now, you need me to be practical. So, food, then strategy, then the press statement, then the Weasley situation. In that order." The lift opened onto the atrium. Neville was waiting. "There's a room," Neville said without preamble. "Unused office on level 2. I had someone clear it out. Food's coming. Also, you should know, Hermione's here." Harry's stomach dropped. "Where?" "In the room. She was waiting when I got there." Neville paused. "She has her research face on, Harry. The scary one." The unused office turned out to be a windowless box barely big enough for a desk and 4 chairs. Hermione was sitting in one of the chairs with a stack of books, a legal pad, and an expression that could have frozen magma. "Sit down," she said, the moment Harry walked in. He sat. Neville closed the door. Daphne leaned against the wall, watching. "I've been in the public gallery for the last 3 hours, Hermione said. "I heard everything. I've also been to the Ministry archives, I still have researcher access, and I've pulled the original trust documents. I needed to see them for myself." She looked at Harry. "You're right. About all of it. The Malfoy fraud is blatant. I can't believe it went undetected for 17 years, except that it was designed not to be detected, and Dumbledore either couldn't or wouldn't see it. The Pruitt situation is exactly as your solicitor described it." Her eyes flicked to Daphne. Something passed between them, not hostility, but a mutual sizing up. Two very intelligent women establishing territorial boundaries. "I also pulled the stipend records," Hermione continued. "Molly's signatures are genuine. The payments are real. I've verified them independently." Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. "I didn't want to believe it. Neither did I. But here's what I need to know, Harry." She leaned forward. "What's the endgame? Because what you did in there today, claiming 15 seats, injuncting the Malfoys, calling in the Weasley debt, that's not an endgame. That's an opening move. And I need to know what you're moving toward before I decide where I stand." Harry looked at her. At Neville. At Daphne. "I want my money back," he said. "All of it. From everyone who took it. I want the Malfoy estate to pay for what Lucius stole. I want the systems that allowed this to happen torn down and rebuilt so it can't happen to anyone else, not just me, every orphan, every ward, every child whose estate was managed by people who treated it as a slush fund." He paused. "And I want to look Molly Weasley in the eye and hear her explain why she took money from a baby she claimed to love like a son. I want the truth. After that, we'll see. Hermione studied him for a long time. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. I'm with you. But Harry, you have to let me help with the Weasley side. Not as your solicitor. As your friend. And as Ron's. Because if this goes wrong, I lose the only family I've ever chosen. I know. Then let me help. I was counting on it. The food arrived, sandwiches and tea, courtesy of the ministry's kitchens. They ate quickly, standing, while Daphne laid out the afternoon's agenda. The Malfoy injunction was in effect. The lordship claims were recorded. The Pruitt administration transfer would process automatically through Gringotts. The press is the immediate problem, Daphne said, biting into a sandwich with the efficiency of someone who viewed eating as a necessary interruption to more important work. The story is already out. By tonight, every wizarding newspaper in Britain will be running some version of Boy Who Lived claims 15 lordships, destroys Malfoys, betrays Weasleys. We need to control the narrative. One interview, Harry said. Just one. Carefully chosen. The Quibbler, Hermione said immediately. Luna's father still runs it, and Luna would, no. Not this time. Harry shook his head. This needs to hit the mainstream. This needs to be in the Prophet. Daphne raised an eyebrow. The Prophet will spin it however sells the most papers. Not if I give them something too good to spin. If I give them the Malfoy fraud documents, the public-facing ones, not the sealed evidence, the story writes itself. Orphan discovers he was robbed by Death Eater while sleeping in cupboard. The Prophet doesn't need to spin that. It's already the most compelling story they've published in years. Daphne looked at him with that sharpened expression again. That's, actually very good. I have my moments. The Weasley angle, I keep the Weasley details private. For now. The 30-day debt notice is public record, but I don't comment on it. No accusations, no details, no drama. If anyone asks, I say it's a private matter between families and I'm handling it personally. And if the Weasleys go public? Then they go public, and the truth comes out on their terms, which is what should happen anyway. I'm not going to drag Molly through the press. Not unless she forces my hand. Neville, who had been quiet, spoke up. What about Draco? Harry looked at him. The injunction freezes the Malfoy estate. That includes Draco's personal accounts, his share of the family assets, everything. Draco wasn't involved in the fraud, he was a child when it started. But he's going to pay for it anyway. Harry had been thinking about this. He'd been thinking about it since Griptooth first opened the Red Ledger. Draco Malfoy was a complicated equation, a former enemy who'd made terrible choices under terrible pressure, who'd lowered his wand when it mattered, whose mother had saved Harry's life. Harry didn't like Draco. He wasn't sure he ever would. But there was a difference between justice and cruelty, and Harry knew which side of the line he wanted to stand on. The injunction is against the estate, not against Draco personally, Harry said. If Draco wants to separate his interests from his father's, he can. He'd need to formally petition to dissolve his claim on the Malfoy inheritance and establish himself as an independent party. That would mean giving up the Malfoy name, Daphne said. Everything that comes with it. The title, the properties, the social position. It would mean choosing who he wants to be, Harry said. Which is more than most people get. Neville nodded slowly. You're giving him an exit. I'm giving him a choice. What he does with it is his business. The afternoon sun was slanting through the ministry's enchanted windows, fake sunlight, but convincing, when Harry walked back through the atrium. The crowd had thinned but the press contingent had doubled, and they surged toward him like water through a breach. Daphne stepped in front of him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Lord Potter will give one statement. He will not take questions. Anyone who breaches the 3-foot perimeter will be removed by the Auror office. Are we clear? They were clear. Harry stepped forward. The cameras fired. The quick quotes quills poised. My name is Harry Potter. Today I claimed 15 lordships that are mine by blood, magic, and legal right. During the process of claiming these lordships, I discovered evidence of systematic financial fraud committed against my estate over a period of 17 years, primarily by Lucius Malfoy in his capacity as a trustee appointed by Albus Dumbledore. He paused. Let them write. The Wisengamot has granted an injunction freezing the Malfoy estate pending a full hearing. The evidence is comprehensive, verified by Gringotts, and speaks for itself. I will release the non-sealed portions of the evidence file to the press this evening. Another pause. I also claim the Pruitt lordship today. This is a private family matter and I will not be commenting on it further at this time. I ask the press to respect the privacy of the Weasley family during this transition. He looked directly into the nearest camera. For 17 years, people I trusted managed my inheritance. Some of them served that trust honestly. Some of them didn't. Today I started the process of accountability. It's overdue. He stepped back. Daphne closed ranks. They walked to the apparition point, and Harry turned on his heel and vanished before anyone could shout a follow-up question. He landed in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. The house was dark and quiet. Creature had left dinner on the table, roast chicken, untouched, still warm under a stasis charm. Harry sat down at the table. He looked at the 15 rings on his fingers. He listened to the silence of the old house, where Sirius had been miserable and Walburga Black's portrait still screamed behind its curtain and the whole bloody history of magical Britain seemed to be compressed into the walls like fossils in stone. He thought about Ron's face in the Wisengamot doorway. He thought about Molly's Christmas jumpers. He thought about Dumbledore's office, the spinning silver instruments, the careful smile, the chess game that had used Harry's life, and his money, as pieces. Then he picked up a fork and ate his dinner, because Daphne was right. Emotional crises were better handled on a full stomach. Outside, somewhere in Wizarding Britain, Lucius Malfoy was receiving the news that his accounts were frozen. Narcissa was reading the injunction documents. Draco was staring at a wall and trying to figure out what was left. At the Burrow, an owl was landing on the kitchen windowsill, carrying a Gringotts notification that Molly Weasley's administrative access to the Pruitt estate had been terminated, and a formal notice that a loan of 50,000 galleons was being called in, payable within 30 days. And in a tiny flat in London, Ron Weasley was sitting on the edge of his bed with a letter from Harry that had been delivered 10 minutes after the press statement, just 5 words in Harry's messy handwriting, "I'm sorry. I'll explain everything." Ron held the letter for a long time. Then he set it on the nightstand, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out whether the ache in his chest was anger or grief or something else entirely. The day wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But the first moves had been made, and the board would never look the same again. Chapter 3, The Fallout. The owl from Molly Weasley arrived at 7 minutes past 6 in the evening, which meant she'd had the Gringotts notification for approximately 40 minutes before sitting down to write. Harry knew this because he'd asked Griptooth to timestamp the delivery. He wanted to know how long she'd take. 40 minutes was fast, faster than he'd expected. Either she'd been waiting for this day to come, or the shock had burned through her so quickly that the response was pure reflex. The letter was short. "Harry dear, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Please come to the Burrow tonight so we can sort this out as a family. Arthur and I love you very much." Molly. Harry read it twice, standing at the kitchen counter in Grimmauld Place with the remains of his dinner cooling behind him. He noted the word misunderstanding. He noted the word family. He noted the absence of any acknowledgement that the stipend existed, that the loan existed, that any of the things he'd described in front of the Wisengamot had actually happened. It was, he realized, exactly the letter she would write if she thought he didn't have proof. He set it aside and opened the second letter, which had arrived simultaneously. This one was from Arthur. Harry, I don't understand what happened today. I heard about the Gringotts session from Percy, who heard it from his department head. I need to talk to you. Not at the Burrow, somewhere neutral. I'll be at the Leaky Cauldron at 8 if you can make it. Arthur, that was different. Arthur wasn't performing family warmth. Arthur was asking questions. And he'd specifically said not at the Burrow, which meant he either wanted to talk without Molly present or he'd already tried to talk to Molly and hadn't liked what he'd heard. Harry picked up his quill and wrote 2 responses. To Molly, I'll come by the Burrow tomorrow. Tonight isn't the right time. To Arthur, I'll be there. He sent the owl and went upstairs to change. Creature materialized at the top of the stairs with a pressed shirt and a look of disapproval. Master is going out again. Master is going to the pub. Master has not slept in 36 hours. Master is aware. Creature held out the shirt with the aggrieved dignity of a butler who knew his employer was making poor decisions but was constitutionally unable to stop him. Harry took it, changed, and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He looked tired. The rings caught the light, he couldn't take them off now even if he wanted to. Once claimed, lordship rings bonded to the wearer's magic. They'd only come off when he died. He thought about glamoring them. Hiding them under an illusion so he could walk into the Leaky Cauldron without every patron staring at his hands. He dismissed the idea immediately. He was done hiding things. The Leaky Cauldron was half full when he arrived. The usual evening crowd, ministry workers unwinding, Diagon Alley shopkeepers having a pint, a cluster of Hogwarts-age kids nursing butterbeers in the corner. Harry's entrance caused a ripple. Heads turned. Whispers started. He ignored them and scanned the room. Arthur Weasley was in a booth at the back, and the man looked like he'd aged 10 years since morning. His thinning red hair was disheveled, his ministry robes rumpled, and there were 2 empty glasses of fire whiskey in front of him with a third half finished in his hand. He saw Harry and something complicated moved across his face, relief and dread and a kind of exhausted sadness that hit Harry harder than anger would have. Harry slid into the booth across from him. Arthur. Harry. Arthur took a drink. Set the glass down. Picked it up again. Set it down. I talked to Molly. And she told me about the stipend. She told me about the trust. She said it was Dumbledore's idea, that he told her it was standard practice for magical guardians, that she didn't think it was. He stopped. Rubbed his face with both hands. She's been lying to me. Hasn't she? It wasn't really a question. Harry answered it anyway. The stipend was real. 1,500 galleons a year from my estate, paid into an account in her maiden name. She was also drawing 3,000 a year from the Pruitt estate as administrator. And the Burrow loan, 50,000 galleons, your signature and hers, was taken from the Pruitt estate and never repaid. Arthur's hand trembled around his glass. The Burrow loan. I remember signing that. Molly said it was a family loan, from the Pruitt estate, the boys' inheritance. She said Gideon and Fabian would have wanted us to have it. That it was family money. It was family money. It just wasn't her family money to give. She was administrator, not owner. The loan should have had repayment terms enforced by Gringotts, but the goblins don't intervene in internal estate matters unless the lord or heir requests it. There was no lord or heir. Until now. Arthur stared at the table. Harry watched him and felt something he hadn't expected, not anger, but a deep, bone-level sympathy. Arthur Weasley had spent his entire adult life being the honest man in the room. He'd taken his modest ministry salary, he'd patched the Burrow together with magic and stubbornness, he'd raised 7 children on love and not much else. And the whole time, his wife had been supplementing their income with money drawn from the estates of a dead couple and their orphaned son, and he hadn't known. Or had he? Harry had to ask. He owed Arthur that much, the chance to answer. "Arthur, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Go ahead. Did you know any of it? The stipend, the Pruitt withdrawals, did you have any idea?" Arthur looked at him. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "I knew about the borough loan. Molly told me it was from the Pruitt estate and I signed the paperwork because she said it was available and we needed it. The twins had just been born and we were drowning. I didn't ask questions I should have asked." He paused. "The stipend, no. I swear on my magic, Harry. I didn't know about the Potter stipend. I didn't know she was on the trust. I didn't know about any of it until 3 hours ago." A faint glow pulsed around Arthur's wand hand when he said "I swear on my magic." Spontaneous magical oath. Involuntary, the kind that happened when a wizard meant something so deeply that their magic responded without being asked. It was the most reliable lie detector in the wizarding world, and it had just confirmed that Arthur Weasley was telling the truth. Harry felt something in his chest loosen. Not completely, the wound was still there, still raw, but the worst possibility, the one where Arthur had been part of it from the beginning, was off the table. "Okay," Harry said. "I believe you." Arthur let out a breath that seemed to take half his body weight with it. He sagged back against the booth. "What happens now?" Arthur asked. "The loan, 50,000 galleons, Harry. We don't have it. We've never had anything close to that. The borough is all it's the children's home. It's everything. I'm not going to take the borough, Arthur." Arthur looked up sharply. "I called in the loan because I needed to establish my authority over the Pruitt estate and send a clear legal signal. I needed the Wisengamot to see that I was serious. But I'm not interested in making your family homeless." He leaned forward. "I need something else from you." "What?" "The truth. All of it. From Molly. Not the version she's rehearsing right now, the real version. I want to know when it started, whose idea it was, what she knew, and what she told herself to justify it. And I want her to tell me to my face." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. The pub noise washed around them, laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation. Normal sounds for normal people having a normal evening, completely disconnected from the slow-motion earthquake happening in the back booth. "She'll do it," Arthur said finally. "I'll make sure she does. Harry, you have to understand, Molly isn't, she's not a bad person. She's not Lucius Malfoy. She loved your parents. She loved you. I know that doesn't excuse, it doesn't. No. It doesn't." Arthur took a slow breath. "But it's still true. She can be both things at once. She can love you and have done wrong by you. People are messier than ledgers." Harry looked at the man across from him, rumpled, heartbroken, a little bit drunk, still trying to be fair even as his world was crumbling. Arthur Weasley. The most decent man Harry had ever known. "Tomorrow," Harry said. "I'll come to the borough at noon. I want to talk to Molly. Just her and me. You can be there if you want, but no one else. Not Ron, not Ginny, not the twins. This stays between us until Molly and I have had it out." "All right. And Arthur, the borough loan. I'm going to convert it. Instead of repayment, I'm going to transfer it into a formal lease. The Weasley family can stay in the borough indefinitely, but the property reverts to the Pruitt estate. It's the fair solution, you keep your home, I keep my asset, and the loan is cleared." Arthur stared at him. His eyes glistened and he blinked rapidly, looking away toward the bar, jaw tight. "You do that? I'm not trying to destroy your family. I'm trying to get what's mine and hear the truth. That's all I've ever wanted from anyone." Arthur nodded. He couldn't seem to speak for a moment. He finished his fire whiskey in one swallow, set the glass down carefully, and stood up. "Tomorrow at noon," he said. "I'll have her ready. He extended his hand. Harry shook it. Arthur's grip was firm, and his hand was calloused from years of tinkering with Muggle artifacts, and there was something in the handshake that felt like a new beginning, or at least the acknowledgement that the old thing, whatever it had been, was over. Arthur left. Harry sat in the booth for another minute, staring at the empty glasses, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him like deep water. Then he got up and walked to the bar to settle Arthur's tab, because that was the kind of thing you did when someone had just had their life turned inside out on your account, even if you were the wronged party. Tom the barkeep looked at him with wide eyes, gaze darting to the rings. Harry paid, nodded, and headed for the door. He didn't make it. Potter. The voice came from a shadowed table near the fireplace. Harry's hand went to his wand, not drawing, just touching, a reflex so ingrained it was practically autonomic. He turned. Draco Malfoy stood up from the table. He'd been sitting alone, a single drink in front of him, untouched. He was wearing plain dark robes, no Malfoy crest, no family insignia. His face was pale, which for Draco was saying something, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as well as Harry had, which was to say not at all. Malfoy. Can we talk? Harry studied him. Looking for the angle, the trap, the hidden play. He didn't find one. What he found was a 20-year-old man who looked like he'd been punched in the gut and was still trying to figure out which way was up. 5 minutes, Harry said. Here. They sat. Draco across from him, the fireplace crackling between them, the pub carrying on around them as if two former enemies weren't about to have the most consequential conversation of their adult lives. Draco spoke first. I'm not here to beg. Good. I'd be disappointed if you were. I'm here because I need to understand what's coming. My family's accounts are frozen. Our solicitor says the injunction is airtight. Mother is, he stopped. Started again. Father is under house arrest and sending owls every 10 minutes demanding things I can't give him. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out whether you're going to take everything or just most of it. Harry leaned back. You read the charges? I read what Finch Fletchley sent us. The summary. Read the full file. Daphne will send you a copy tonight. Read every page, and then tell me honestly whether your father deserves what's coming. Draco's jaw tightened. What my father did, was theft. From an orphan. For 17 years. While that orphan was sleeping in a cupboard, wearing rags, going hungry. Your father sat on my trust and bled it dry while he bought your mother jewelry and funded his political ambitions and lived like a king on money that was meant to keep a child safe. Draco didn't flinch. He held Harry's gaze, and something complicated moved behind his gray eyes, not denial, not defensiveness, but the look of someone who had always suspected the floor was rotten and had just been shown the termites. I know what my father is, Draco said quietly. I've known since I was 16 and he handed me to a lunatic who wanted to use me as a punishment. I don't have illusions, Potter. I'm not here to defend him. Then what are you here for? I'm here to ask what happens to my mother. Harry hadn't expected that. He'd expected Draco to fight for the money, the properties, the family name. Instead, the first thing out of his mouth was Narcissa. Narcissa wasn't on the trust, Harry said. She wasn't involved in the fraud, as far as we can tell. But the injunction is against the estate, which means it covers everything in the Malfoy name. If your father is found liable for treble damages, the entire estate is forfeit. Including whatever your mother's share would be. She saved your life. I know she did. In the forest. She lied to Voldemort's face. She told him you were dead when you weren't. Without her, you wouldn't be sitting here with your 15 rings and your legal briefs. You'd be dead, and so would everyone else. I know, Draco. The use of his first name seemed to startle Draco. He blinked, and for a second the mask slipped, not the old sneering mask, but the new one, the carefully constructed facade of a young man trying to be something better than what he came from. Underneath it, Harry caught a glimpse of something raw. Fear. Not for himself. For his mother. "Here's what I'm going to do," Harry said. "The fraud claim is against Lucius personally and the Malfoy estate collectively. If you and Narcissa want to separate your interests from his, formally, legally, publicly, I'll instruct Daphne to exempt your personal assets from the injunction. Separate our interests. Renounce the Malfoy estate. Both of you. Let Lucius's share bear the full weight of the judgment. You and Narcissa walk away with whatever personal assets you can demonstrate were acquired independently of the family estate." Draco stared at him. "That's, not nothing, but it's not much. Mother's jewelry, some personal accounts. A few thousand galleons at most. Everything significant is in the estate. Then it's a question of what matters more to you. The money, or your mother's freedom from your father's consequences. That's not a fair choice. No. It's not. Neither was sleeping in a cupboard while your father stole my inheritance. Life's been pretty short on fair choices for both of us, Malfoy. The difference is, I'm offering you one." Draco sat with that for a long time. The fire crackled. Someone at the bar laughed at a joke. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small, enormous decisions being made in a corner booth. "Can I think about it?" Draco asked. "You've got until the hearing. 1 week. Talk to your mother. Talk to a solicitor who isn't on your father's payroll. Make a decision." Draco nodded slowly. He started to stand, then stopped. "Potter." "Yeah. For what it's worth, if the evidence shows what you say it shows, then my father deserves what's coming. I won't pretend otherwise. But I need you to know that I didn't know. I was a child when it started, and by the time I was old enough to understand family finances, I was too busy trying to survive a war my father dragged me into." "I believe you." Draco looked surprised. "Don't make a thing of it," Harry said. "Go home. Read the file. Talk to your mother." Draco left. Harry sat alone for another moment, turning his fire whiskey glass in his hands. He'd ordered one without thinking about it, and now he wasn't sure he wanted it. He drank it anyway. The burn felt appropriate. His wand vibrated in his pocket. A communication charm, Daphne's. He tapped it and her voice filled the air around his head, audible only to him. "Where are you?" "Leaky Cauldron. Get back to Grimmauld Place. We have a problem." The tone of her voice killed any thought of a second drink. Harry left money on the table and apparat home. Daphne was in the drawing room. She was standing, which was unusual. Daphne preferred to work sitting down, controlling the space from a position of composed stillness. The fact that she was on her feet, pacing, her usually immaculate hair showing signs of distracted finger-combing, told Harry something was wrong before she opened her mouth. Neville was there too, standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed and his face set in the expression Harry had come to think of as his battle face, calm, focused, and quietly ready for violence. "What happened?" Harry asked. Daphne stopped pacing. "Griptooth sent a message 20 minutes ago. Lucius Malfoy attempted to make a large withdrawal from a secondary vault, one that wasn't covered by the initial injunction because it was registered under a shell company, not the Malfoy name directly. Gringotts caught it because they were monitoring all activity connected to the Malfoy magical signature. He tried to move 300,000 galleons to Zurich. You said he tried. Gringotts blocked it. The goblins extended the freeze to all accounts connected to Malfoy's magical signature, which they can do under the emergency provisions of the Gringotts Accord when a verified fraud case is active. Lucius's money isn't going anywhere. So what's the problem? Daphne and Neville exchanged a look. The problem, Neville said, is what he did after the transfer was blocked. He pulled a scroll from his pocket and handed it to Harry. It was a Gringotts security transcript, a magical recording of communications intercepted by the bank's monitoring wards. Harry read it. The transcript showed 3 outgoing messages sent from Malfoy Manor via enchanted parchment, untraceable, or so Lucius thought. The goblin's monitoring was more thorough than that. The first message was to Augustus Finch Fletchley, instructing him to file an emergency appeal against the injunction. Standard legal maneuver. The second was to Cornelius Fudge, who was apparently still in contact with Lucius despite being disgraced and removed from office years ago. The message asked Fudge to activate old arrangements, whatever that meant. Nothing good. The third message was to a name Harry didn't recognize. Thaddeus Burke. The Potter problem requires a permanent solution. Standard terms. The boy leaves Grimmauld Place every morning without guard. Usual place for details. Harry read the message 3 times. His face didn't change. His hands didn't shake. But the rings on his fingers began to glow, faintly, steadily, like coals being blown to life. Thaddeus Burke, he said. Who is he? Former Nocturne Alley operator, Daphne said. Ran a crew of mercenary cursebreakers during the First War. Did wet work for Death Eaters who wanted deniability. He dropped off the map after the Second War, but Gringotts intelligence suggests he's still active. He's a hit wizard, Neville translated bluntly. Lucius just put a contract on my life, Harry said. He said it flatly, the way you'd note that it was raining. It gets better, Daphne said, without any trace of humor. Griptooth had the message intercepted before delivery, Burke never received it. But the message itself is evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Combined with the attempted asset flight, Lucius has just violated his house arrest, his parole conditions, and about 15 sections of the criminal code. Harry looked at the transcript again. The Potter problem requires a permanent solution. Permanent solution. Lucius Malfoy, cornered and desperate, had reached for the only tool he'd ever really understood, violence. Not cunning, not legal maneuvering, not the sophisticated financial manipulation he'd employed for 17 years. Just murder. Simple, direct, and stupid. It was almost disappointing. Has the DMLE been notified? Harry asked. Not yet. Griptooth sent it to us first, per your standing instructions. You're the client. Harry thought for exactly 5 seconds. Send it to the DMLE. Send a copy to Kingsley directly, don't go through channels, Fudge might still have people in the chain. And send a copy to the Wisengamot scribe for the official record. I want this entered into evidence at the fraud hearing. That'll be the end of Lucius, Neville said. Attempted murder on top of fraud. They'll put him in Azkaban and lose the key. That's the idea. And Burke? Daphne asked. Burke never got the message. He's not guilty of anything yet. But flag his name with the Auror office. If Lucius tries again through a different channel, I want them ready. Daphne nodded and began writing, rapid, efficient, 3 letters at once using her paired dictation quills and her own hand. Harry watched her work and felt something that took him a moment to identify. Gratitude. Not the polite, surface kind, something deeper. This woman had walked into his life 3 days ago as a hired solicitor and had since spent every waking hour dismantling an edifice of corruption that had defined his entire existence. She owed him nothing. She was being paid, yes, but no fee was worth the hours she was putting in, the personal risk she was taking, or the bridge she was burning with her own father by standing next to Harry in the Wisengamot. Daphne. She looked up from her writing. Why are you doing this? She held his gaze. For a moment, the professional mask thinned, and he saw something underneath, not vulnerability, exactly, but honesty. The real thing, unfiltered and unpolished. Because I spent 7 years watching from the Slytherin table while the wizarding world treated you like either a savior or a scapegoat, and nobody, not once, treated you like a person. And when Griptooth brought me your file, I read 4,000 pages of people taking from you, and not a single page of anyone giving back. She returned to her writing. I'm a solicitor. I fix things that are broken. Your situation is the most broken thing I've ever seen. That's not the whole reason. Her quill paused for a fraction of a second. No. It's not. But the rest of it isn't relevant to the case. It might be relevant to me. Daphne looked up again. Something shifted in the air between them, not tension, not attraction, not quite. Something more like recognition. Two people seeing each other clearly for the first time and not looking away. Ask me again when this is over, she said. When I'm not your solicitor and you're not my client and neither of us is operating on 36 hours without sleep. Deal. Neville, who had been studying a fascinating section of wallpaper during this exchange, cleared his throat. So. Assassination attempt handled. Malfoy going to Azkaban. What's next? Next, Harry said, is the Prophet interview. Daphne, did we get a response from the editor? Barnabas Cuff is practically salivating. He offered a full front page spread. I negotiated terms, we approve the final copy, they can't editorialize, and they print the fraud documents in full as a supplement. He agreed to everything, which tells you how badly he wants this story. When? He wants to send a reporter tonight. Good. Who's the reporter? He suggested Rita Skeeter. Harry and Neville both made the same sound, a kind of involuntary grunt of revulsion that transcended words. Absolutely not, Harry said. I already declined. I suggested they send someone competent instead. They're sending a junior reporter named Aisha Patil, Padma's cousin, apparently. Good reputation, no connection to any of the involved parties. Patil. Fine. When? 9 o'clock. Here, if you're comfortable with it. It's the most secure location. Harry looked around the drawing room of Grimmauld Place. The black family tapestry on the wall, burned spots where disowned family members had been blasted off. The heavy curtains. The dark wood. It was grim and gothic and perfect, the ancestral home of one of his 15 houses, a visual reminder of everything he'd inherited and everything that had been hidden from him. Here works, he said. Neville, you should go home. Get some sleep. I'll sleep when you sleep. I'm not going to sleep tonight. Then neither am I. Harry didn't argue. He'd learned, somewhere between the Department of Mysteries and the Battle of Hogwarts, that arguing with Neville Longbottom about loyalty was like arguing with a mountain about erosion. You could make your case, but the mountain wasn't going anywhere. Aisha Patil arrived at 9 sharp. She was younger than Harry expected, maybe 22, with Padma's dark eyes and a nervous energy that she was working hard to contain. She carried a self-inking quill, a notebook, and a camera that she handled with the careful reverence of someone who'd paid for it herself. Harry met her in the entrance hall. She shook his hand, her eyes widening at the rings, and followed him to the drawing room without a word. Professional. Good. They sat across from each other. Daphne was in the corner, monitoring. Neville was by the door, a presence more than a participant. Aisha set up her quill and notebook, took a breath, and began. Lord Potter, thank you for agreeing to this interview. I should tell you up front, I'm not going to ask softball questions. My job is to get the truth for the readers. Good. Ask whatever you want. I'll answer honestly or I'll tell you I can't answer. No spin. Aisha's nervous energy settled into something sharper. She'd expected resistance and gotten openness, and it recalibrated her on the spot. Harry watched it happen, the shift from prepared combatant to genuinely curious journalist. It was like watching a door open. Let's start with the basics. 15 lordship rings. When did you find out? Yesterday morning. I was summoned to Gringotts for what I thought was routine paperwork. I left 12 hours later as the Lord of 15 houses. How did you react? I put the rings on and got to work. No shock. No disbelief. Harry considered the question. I've had a prophecy hanging over my head since before I was born. I've been the boy who lived, the chosen one, undesirable number one, and the man who conquered. Finding out I'm also the heir to 15 ancient houses was, honestly. It was the first time I've ever received news about myself that came with actual power instead of just a target on my back. Aisha wrote furiously. The fraud allegations against Lucius Malfoy, can you summarize them for readers who aren't familiar with trust law? Simply. Lucius Malfoy was put in charge of managing my money after my parents died. Instead of managing it, he stole it. About 2 million galleons over 17 years, through inflated fees, fake charges, and insider trading. He used his position as my trustee to enrich himself while I grew up with nothing. You grew up with nothing? You're Harry Potter. I grew up in a cupboard under the stairs in my aunt and uncle's house in Surrey. I didn't know I was a wizard until I was 11. I didn't know my parents had money until I was 13, and even then, I only knew about one vault. The rest, the lordships, the investments, the properties, was hidden from me by Albus Dumbledore and stolen by the people he appointed to manage it. Aisha's quill had stopped moving. She was staring at him. A cupboard, she said. Under the stairs. For 10 years. While my trust fund paid 2,000 galleons a month to my aunt and uncle, who spent it on themselves. While Lucius Malfoy siphoned millions through shell companies. While the greatest wizard of the age signed off on it every quarter. He said it without anger. Without self-pity. Just facts, laid out in sequence, and the quiet devastation of those facts was more powerful than any dramatic performance could have been. May I quote you on the cupboard? Quote me on everything. Aisha resumed writing. The Pruitt lordship claim, there are rumors you're foreclosing on the Weasley family. The Weasleys are national heroes. Can you? I'm not foreclosing on the Weasleys. I claim the Pruitt lordship, which is mine by right. There's an outstanding loan between the Pruitt estate and the Weasley family that I've called in. It's a financial matter, not a personal vendetta. But the Weasleys are your friends. Your best friend Ron Weasley, is my best friend. This doesn't change that. Family finances and personal relationships are separate things. I'd rather not discuss the Weasley situation in detail, it's a private matter and I'm handling it privately. Aisha studied him. You're protecting them. I'm giving them the chance to handle this with dignity. Whether they take it is up to them. The interview went on for another 40 minutes. Aisha asked about the Weissengemot seats, the political implications, the financial details of the Malfoy fraud. Harry answered everything directly, with the kind of plain-spoken honesty that made for devastating reading. No flourishes. No rhetoric. Just the truth, spoken by a young man with 15 rings on his fingers and the calm certainty of someone who had stopped asking permission to exist. When it was over, Aisha packed up her notebook and stood. This is going to change everything, she said. You know that. That's the idea. One more question, off the record. Harry raised an eyebrow. Daphne shifted in the corner, but Harry waved her off. Go ahead. Are you scared? Harry looked at her. He thought about Lucius's message, permanent solution. He thought about the Weissengemot, the frozen Malfoy accounts, the debt notice sitting on the Weasley kitchen table. He thought about Ron's face and Arthur's trembling hands and Draco's quiet desperation. No, he said. I spent 17 years being scared. Of Voldemort, of the prophecy, of dying. I'm done being scared. Now I'm just getting on with it. Aisha left. The house went quiet. Neville took the couch in the drawing room, he'd brought a blanket from somewhere, practical as always, and was asleep within minutes, his wand on the floor beside him, within easy reach. The man could sleep anywhere. Harry envied him that. Daphne didn't leave. She was still in the corner, working. She'd conjured a small desk and covered it with parchment, and she was drafting what looked like the formal evidence submission for the Malfoy hearing. Her quill moved in steady, precise strokes, and the only sound in the room was the scratch of nib on parchment and Neville's slow, even breathing. Harry sat in the armchair across from her and watched her work. He should have been sleeping, every muscle in his body ached, his eyes were gritty, and his mind felt like it had been wrung out and hung up to dry. But his brain wouldn't stop turning, and the quiet company was better than the alternative, which was lying alone in the dark with his thoughts. "You should sleep," Daphne said, without looking up. "So should you. I'll sleep when the evidence submission is finished." "How much longer?" 2 hours. Maybe 3. "Then I'll wait." She did look up at that. Her grey eyes caught the candlelight, and for a moment she looked almost soft, the severity of her features gentled by exhaustion and warmth and the late-night intimacy of two people working toward the same goal in a quiet room. "You don't have to wait for me, Potter." "Harry." "What?" "My name is Harry. You've been calling me Potter all day, which is fine in public, but we're sitting in my house at midnight and you've spent the last 36 hours rebuilding my life. I think you can use my first name." She held his gaze for a beat. 2 beats. 3. "Harry," she said, and it sounded different in her voice. Not warmer, exactly, she didn't do warm, not in any conventional sense, but more real. Like she was adding him to a very short list of people who got to see her without the professional armor. "Thank you," he said. "For all of it. The legal work, the Wisengamot performance, the thing with my father's name, you figured out the Greengrass connection to the Pruitt line in what, 2 hours? Most genealogists would take months. 3 hours. And I had the Gringotts archives, which helps. Still. You're the reason any of this is working." She set her quill down. Properly, deliberately, the way she did when she was about to say something that mattered. "I need to tell you something about my father." Harry waited. He didn't declare neutrality today because he's cautious. He declared neutrality because he's terrified. The Greengrass family has financial entanglements with the Malfoys, not fraud, nothing illegal, but business partnerships that have been profitable for decades. If the Malfoy estate collapses, Greengrass Investments loses a significant revenue stream. How significant? Significant enough that my father sent me a howler this afternoon, which I incinerated, obviously, telling me that my representation of you was a betrayal of the family and that I should resign immediately. Are you going to? Don't insult me. Harry almost smiled. What does this mean for you? Practically. It means I'll probably be disinherited. My father won't do it publicly, the optics would be terrible, disinheriting your daughter for doing her job, but he'll cut me off financially and make it clear that my future with the family is contingent on walking away from you. And you're telling me this because you deserve to know that my involvement has a cost, and I'm paying it willingly. I don't want you to find out later and feel guilty or obligated. I made my choice. It's mine. Harry looked at her, really looked, the way he'd learned to look at people during the war, past the surface and into the architecture underneath. Daphne Greengrass was not a kind person. She wasn't warm, or gentle, or nurturing. She was sharp and precise and occasionally brutal in her efficiency. But she was honest. Ruthlessly, uncomfortably, uncompromisingly honest. And she had chosen to stand next to him when standing next to him cost her everything she'd grown up with. When this is over, Harry said, I'm going to need a permanent legal advisor. Someone to manage the affairs of 15 houses. It's a full-time position. The pay is obscene. One corner of her mouth twitched. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an alternative to the one your father is trying to take away. Independence. On your own terms. I haven't finished the current job yet. Consider it an advance offer. She looked at him for a long moment. The candle flickered. Neville snored softly on the couch. The old house creaked around them, settling into its bones, and the 15 rings on Harry's fingers glowed faintly in the dim light, not with power, but with something quieter. Recognition. Belonging. The feeling of pieces falling into place. "I'll think about it," Daphne said. She picked up her quill. "Now shut up and let me work." Harry shut up. He leaned back in the armchair, watching the candle flame, feeling the day's weight finally settle onto him like a heavy blanket. His eyes drifted closed. He didn't intend to sleep, there was too much to do, too much to plan, too many balls in the air, but his body made the decision for him, and the last thing he was aware of before he went under was the steady, rhythmic scratch of Daphne's quill, writing the future one word at a time. He dreamed of his parents. Not a memory, he didn't have memories of his parents, not real ones. A construction. His mother's red hair, his father's glasses, the house in Godric's Hollow that he'd only ever seen as a ruin. In the dream, the house was whole. His mother was standing in the kitchen, and she was wearing a ring, just one, the Potter ring, gold with a stag, and she was smiling at him. "You found them," she said. "You found us." And then she was gone, and Harry woke up in the armchair at Grimmauld Place with dawn light streaming through the windows and Daphne asleep at her desk, her head resting on a completed evidence submission, her quill still loosely held in her fingers. Neville was already up, standing at the window, looking out at the London morning. He turned when Harry stirred. "Morning," Neville said quietly. "The prophet's out." He held up the newspaper. The headline took up the entire front page, in letters so large they were practically screaming, "Lord Potter, 15 ancient rings, the Malfoy fraud, and the truth about the boy who lived." Below it, Aisha Patil's byline. Below that, Harry's face, not a stock photo, but the picture she'd taken last night, catching him mid-sentence with the rings visible on his hands and the black family tapestry behind him. He looked, Harry thought, like someone you didn't want to cross. "It's good," Neville said. "Fair. Thorough." She printed the fraud documents in full, 6-page supplement. The Malfoy section is devastating. The Weasley section? Barely a mention. Lord Potter claimed the Pruitt lordship and has called in an outstanding family debt, but declined to comment further, requesting privacy for the Weasley family. That's it. She buried it. You got lucky, or she's a better journalist than most. Harry nodded. That was the best he could have hoped for. The Malfoy story would dominate the cycle, it was bigger, louder, and more satisfying to a public that had always suspected the Malfoys of exactly this kind of thing. The Weasley situation would be a footnote. For now. Daphne stirred at her desk. She lifted her head, blinked at the morning light, and immediately looked down at her parchments to verify they were undamaged. Priorities. "What time is it?" she asked. 6:30. "I need coffee and a change of clothes." "In either order." "Creature," Harry said. The elf appeared with a crack. "Coffee for 3. And whatever you can manage for breakfast." Creature looked at Daphne, looked at Neville, looked at the pile of parchments on the conjured desk, and sniffed in a way that conveyed deep disapproval of the state of the drawing room. "Creature will bring breakfast," the elf said. "And clean linens. And air freshener." He vanished. Daphne looked at Harry. "Your elf has opinions. You have no idea." They ate breakfast at the cracked dining table, eggs, toast, bacon, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Creature's cooking had improved dramatically since the Locket incident. Harry sometimes thought the elf expressed love primarily through breakfast foods. Over toast, they planned the day. "The Malfoy hearing is in 6 days, Daphne said, ticking items off on her fingers. "The evidence submission is complete, I finished it at 4 in the morning. It'll be filed with the Gringotts scribe by 9. "The assassination attempt," Neville said. "Has the DMLE responded?" "Kingsley sent an owl at 5 this morning." Harry pulled it from his pocket. "He's dispatching Aurors to Malfoy Manor to arrest Lucius this morning. Violation of house arrest, attempted conspiracy to commit murder. They're also picking up Thaddeus Burke as a precautionary measure." That's fast. Kingsley's been waiting for an excuse to put Lucius away properly since the war ended. I just gave him one wrapped in a bow. And this afternoon? Daphne asked. Harry looked at the clock. 10 hours until noon. 10 hours until he sat across from Molly Weasley and forced a conversation that neither of them wanted to have. This afternoon, I go to the Burrow. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Daphne filed the evidence submission and then vanished home to change, returning an hour later in fresh robes with her hair rearmored in its severe knot. Neville coordinated with the Longbottom allies, the Bones and Abbott and Macmillan families, shoring up the political bloc. Harry reviewed the Pruitt estate files one final time, making sure he understood every number, every date, every transaction. At 11:30, he stood in the entrance hall of Grimmauld Place and looked at himself in the mirror. The rings. The robes. The face of a man about to confront the closest thing he'd ever had to a mother. Do you want company? Neville asked from the doorway. No. This one's mine. I'll be here when you get back. Harry apparat to the outskirts of Ottery St. Catchpole at 10 minutes to noon. The Burrow was visible from the hilltop, crooked, impossible, held together by magic and stubbornness, looking like a building that had been designed by a committee of enthusiastic but wildly disagreeing architects. Chickens in the yard. Gnomes in the garden. The warm, golden-brown chaos of a house that had always felt like home. He walked down the hill and through the gate. The kitchen door opened before he reached it. Molly Weasley stood in the doorway. She looked small. That was the first thing Harry noticed. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished somehow, as though the news had physically compressed her. Her hair was pulled back, her apron was on, she'd been cooking, of course she'd been cooking, it was Molly's response to everything, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Arthur stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. His face was set and sad. Harry, Molly said. Come in. He went in. The kitchen was warm and smelled like bread. A fresh loaf was cooling on the counter. The clock on the wall, the one that showed the family's whereabouts instead of the time, had all its hands pointing in various directions. Ron's hand was at work. Ginny's was at travel. The twins were at shop. None of them were home. Arthur had kept his word. Harry sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he'd eaten 100 meals, where Molly had fussed over his weight, where the family had gathered after the war and counted the survivors and grieved the dead. The table where he'd felt, for the first time in his life, like he belonged somewhere. Molly sat across from him. Arthur remained standing, leaning against the counter, close enough to support his wife but far enough to signal that he wasn't part of her defense. I'm not here to fight, Harry said. I'm here to listen. Molly's hands were folded on the table. They were shaking. I don't know where to start, she whispered. Start with the trust. 1981. Dumbledore appointed you as a trustee of my estate. You accepted a stipend. Start there. She took a breath. Let it out. Took another. After your parents died, everything happened so fast. Sirius was arrested. The Longbottoms were attacked. Dumbledore came to me, it was November, just days after, and he said you needed protecting. Not just physically. Financially. He said the Potter estate was enormous and vulnerable and that without proper management, it would be picked apart by vultures. He was right about the vultures, Harry said. He just didn't mention he was appointing them. Molly flinched. Dumbledore said the trust needed 3 overseers. He was one. Lucius Malfoy was another. Dumbledore said it was necessary to have a representative from the opposing faction to maintain the appearance of balance. And he asked me to be the third. Why you? Because Lily, her voice broke. She pressed her hand to her mouth, and for a moment Harry saw not the woman who'd taken his money but the woman who'd lost her friend. Lily Potter and Molly Weasley, standing together in the order. Fighting together. Trusting each other. Lily named me as your guardian, Molly said, her voice thick. Third in line, after Sirius and the Longbottoms. When Dumbledore overrode the will and sent you to the Dursleys, I fought him. I fought him for weeks. I wanted you here, Harry. I wanted to raise you with my children. But you stopped fighting. He convinced me. The Blood Wards, he said they were the only thing that could protect you. He said Voldemort's followers were still out there, still hunting, and that the wards on Privet Drive were the only place in Britain where you'd be truly safe. And he offered me the trust position as a way to still be involved. To still watch over you, even from a distance. And the stipend? Dumbledore said it was standard. He said all trust overseers received compensation. I didn't question it. I was a young mother with 2 toddlers and a modest income, and 1,500 galleons a year was enough to make a difference. Bill's school supplies. Charlie's dragon handling equipment. Things we couldn't have afforded otherwise. You used my money to raise your children. Molly closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks, silent, steady. Yes. And the Pruitt estate. The administrator position. The 3,000 a year. That was different. That was family money, Gideon and Fabian's inheritance. I was the closest living relative. I thought I was entitled. You'd renounced your Pruitt claims when you married Arthur. You weren't entitled to anything. You petitioned for administrator status specifically to access funds you had no legal right to. Molly's eyes opened. Something flared in them, defensive, desperate, the cornered animal flash of a woman who had justified this to herself for 17 years and was watching her justifications crumble. My brothers died for the cause. They died fighting Voldemort. Their money was sitting in a vault doing nothing while their sister and her children struggled. Was I supposed to just leave it there? It wasn't yours to take. And it wasn't sitting there doing nothing, it was accruing interest for the future lord of the Pruitt house. Which is me. How was I supposed to know that? There was no heir. There hadn't been an heir for nearly 20 years. So you helped yourself. The loan. 50,000 galleons, never repaid. Arthur spoke for the first time. That's enough, Molly. She turned to him, startled. He's right, Arthur said quietly. About all of it. And making excuses isn't going to change that. Molly stared at her husband. Something passed between them, a conversation conducted entirely in looks, the kind that only people who've been married for decades can have. Arthur's face was gentle but unyielding. Tell the truth. All of it. Molly turned back to Harry. The defensiveness drained out of her like water from a cracked vessel, and what was left was something smaller and more honest and infinitely more painful. I knew, she said. I knew the stipend was wrong. Not at first I really did believe Dumbledore when he said it was standard. But as the years went on, I started to wonder. I looked into it once, when Percy was at Hogwarts and I had time to research, and I found out that trust stipends were supposed to be a few hundred galleons at most, not 1,500. But by then I was dependent on the money. We all were. And you never told me. How could I? You were a child. And then you were at Hogwarts, and you were friends with Ron, and you came to the Burrow every summer, and I loved you, Harry. I loved you like my own. And every time I looked at you, I felt guilty, and every time I cashed that check, I told myself it was what Lily would have wanted, for her money to go to the family that was taking care of her son. You weren't taking care of me. The Dursleys were. I know. And that's the part one can never forgive myself for. I should have fought harder. I should have taken you in regardless of what Dumbledore said. Instead, I accepted the money and I told myself it was enough. The kitchen was very quiet. The bread was cooling. The clock ticked. Arthur stood motionless by the counter, his face a mask of grief. Harry looked at Molly Weasley and saw, for the first time, not the mother figure he'd needed or the thief he'd discovered but the actual person, complicated, flawed, loving, selfish, brave, afraid, who had done a wrong thing for a mix of right and wrong reasons and lived with it for 17 years. He didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he understood her, and that was something. "Here's what's going to happen," Harry said. "The Potter Trust stipend is terminated. The Pruitt administrator position is terminated. The borough loan is being converted to a long-term lease. You keep the house, the property reverts to the Pruitt estate. You own nothing more." Molly's mouth opened. "In return," Harry continued, "I need something from you. I need you to tell Ron everything. Not a sanitized version, not a gentle explanation, everything. He deserves to hear it from his mother, not from me, not from the press. Can you do that?" Molly nodded. The tears were still falling but her jaw was set. "And one more thing. I need to know, the trust votes. Dumbledore abstained on the Malfoy settlement, the 200,000 galleons for the fake artifacts. You cast the deciding vote. Why?" Molly went very still. "Dumbledore asked me to," she said. "He said it was necessary. A political concession to keep Lucius cooperative and the trust running smoothly. And you didn't question it." "I questioned everything Dumbledore told me. And then I did what he asked anyway, because he was Albus Dumbledore, and I trusted him more than I trusted myself." Harry stood up. He looked at Molly. He looked at Arthur. He looked around the kitchen of the burrow, the crooked walls, the enchanted dishes, the warmth and chaos and love that had made this place feel like the home he never had. "I'm not your enemy, Molly. I don't want to be. But I'm done being the person everyone takes from and nobody tells the truth to. That version of me is over." He walked to the kitchen door. Stopped. "Tell Ron," he said, without turning around. "Tonight." He walked out into the afternoon sunlight and apparat away, and behind him, in the kitchen of the burrow, Molly Weasley put her head in her hands and wept, and Arthur Weasley stood beside her and didn't say a word, because there was nothing left to say. Chapter 4, The New Order. Harry landed in the alley behind Grimmauld Place and stood there for a full minute, breathing. The April air was cold and smelled like rain and London, exhaust, wet stone, the distant green tang of the park 2 streets over. He pressed his back against the brick wall and closed his eyes and let the conversation with Molly settle into the place where he kept the things that hurt but were necessary. His hands were shaking. He noticed it with a kind of detached interest, the way you notice a crack in a wall that's been there for years but you've only just seen. The rings were warm against his fingers, pulsing faintly, reacting to his emotional state. 15 ancient houses, all of them attuned to him, all of them feeling what he felt. He wondered if any previous lord had ever stood in a Muggle alley shaking after a conversation with a middle-aged woman about money. Probably not. But then, none of them had been raised by the Dursleys. He went inside. The house was quiet, Neville was gone, a note on the kitchen table saying he'd be back by evening. Daphne was in the drawing room, exactly where he'd left her, surrounded by parchment like a general surrounded by maps. She looked up when he walked in and whatever she saw on his face made her set her quill down. "How bad?" she asked. She told the truth. All of it. And Harry dropped into the armchair. "And it's complicated. She's not Lucius. She's a woman who made bad choices for understandable reasons and spent 17 years telling herself stories about why it was okay. She's going to tell Ron tonight." Daphne nodded. She didn't offer comfort or analysis or platitudes. She just accepted the information and moved on, which was exactly what Harry needed. "While you were out, 3 things happened," she said. "First, Lucius was arrested. Kingsley sent orders to Malfoy Manor at 9 this morning. Lucius attempted to resist, fired 2 curses before they subdued him. He's in a ministry holding cell. Narcissa was not arrested but has been placed under monitored house arrest pending the hearing. And Draco? Wasn't home. Apparently he left the manor last night and hasn't been back. Nobody knows where he is. Harry filed that away. Draco running wasn't necessarily bad, it might mean he was thinking, which was exactly what Harry had told him to do. Second thing, Daphne continued. The Prophet hit the streets at 7. It's everywhere. Aisha Patil's article is the most read piece in Prophet history, they've had to do 3 additional print runs. The fraud supplement is being discussed in every pub, shop, and ministry corridor in the country. Public opinion is overwhelmingly in your favor. And the third thing? Daphne's expression shifted. Not concern exactly, Daphne didn't do concern in any recognizable way, but a heightened alertness, like a hawk that spotted movement in the grass. Cornelius Fudge has disappeared. Harry sat forward. Disappeared how? Lucius's intercepted message, the one asking Fudge to activate old arrangements. The DMLE went to Fudge's residence this morning to question him. He was gone. House cleared out overnight. Personal effects removed. No forwarding address. The monitoring charms on his property had been disabled, expertly, from the inside. Fudge doesn't have the skill to disable monitoring charms. No. He had help. The DMLE is investigating, but Kingsley thinks he's fled the country. Switzerland or France, most likely, Fudge has connections in both. Harry thought about that. Fudge was a coward and a political creature, not a fighter. His disappearance meant he knew what was in Lucius's records, knew his own name would come up, knew the old arrangements could be traced. Running was the smart move for a man whose only real talent was self-preservation. He'll surface eventually, Harry said. Men like Fudge always do. They can't stay away from power. Agreed. But in the meantime, his disappearance adds weight to your fraud case. An innocent man doesn't flee. Add it to the evidence file. I want the Wisengamot to know that Lucius's co-conspirators are running. Daphne made a note. Harry watched her write and realized, with a strange kind of clarity that came from being so tired that everything felt sharp-edged and hyperreal, that he was watching the dismantling of an entire corrupt ecosystem in real time. Lucius arrested. Fudge fled. The Malfoy estate frozen. The Pruitt situation resolving. And all of it, every piece, every move, every domino, had been set in motion less than 48 hours ago, in a goblin's office beneath the Thames, when Harry put on 15 rings and decided to stop being the person things happened to. What's on the schedule for today? He asked. Daphne consulted her notes. The Wisengamot hearing is in 5 days, but there's an emergency session called for this evening, 7 o'clock. Multiple members have requested it. Officially, it's to address the unprecedented concentration of political power represented by your 15 seats. Unofficially, it's the old guard trying to find a way to clip your wings before you can use them. Who called the session? Cyrus Greengrass. Something cold moved through Harry's chest. He looked at Daphne. Her face was perfectly composed, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, a stiffness that hadn't been there a moment ago. Your father. My father. Who is, as I mentioned, terrified of what your Malfoy claims will do to Greengrass investments. He's rallying the neutral bloc, the families who didn't declare for or against you yesterday. He wants to propose a motion limiting any single lord to a maximum of 5 Wisengamot seats. Can he do that? He can propose it. Passing it requires a 2/3 majority, 45 votes out of 67. He doesn't have the numbers, not even close. But the proposal itself is the point. It's political theater, a way to signal to the old families that there's organized resistance, that you can be opposed, that the power structure hasn't completely shifted. Harry turned that over. Cyrus Greengrass wasn't stupid. He knew the motion would fail. So the real question was, what was the motion meant to distract from? What's he really doing? Harry asked. Daphne's mouth curved, not a smile, something sharper. Approval, maybe. Or recognition that Harry was thinking the right way. He's buying time. If the chamber spends tonight debating a seat limit, they're not discussing the Malfoy fraud. They're not ratifying your financial claims. They're not doing any of the things that would make your position stronger and his weaker. Every day the Malfoy hearing is delayed is a day Greengrass Investments can quietly unwind its Malfoy partnerships and minimize exposure. So he's protecting his money. He's protecting his money. At the expense of justice for you, which is, to put it in language he'd understand, a poor investment. Harry stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the grey London afternoon. The street below was empty except for a cat sitting on a garden wall, watching pigeons with the patient intensity of a predator who knew that time was on its side. Here's what we're going to do, Harry said. We go to the emergency session. We let your father make his proposal. We let the chamber debate it. And while they're debating, I'm going to do something they won't expect. Which is? I'm going to give seats away. Daphne's quill stopped moving. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, genuine surprise, unfiltered and unhidden. Explain. 15 seats is too many for one person. Your father's wrong about the solution, a legislative cap is crude and sets a dangerous precedent, but he's not wrong about the problem. No single lord should have that much unilateral power. So I'm going to solve it myself, on my own terms, before anyone can force a solution on me. He turned from the window. The conquest rings, Lestrange, Rosier, Dolohov, those seats belong to extinct or condemned houses. I'm going to propose that they be dissolved entirely and their voting power redistributed to the chamber at large. That's 3 seats gone. That's unprecedented. Everything I've done in the last 2 days is unprecedented. The vassal seats, Crabbe, Goyle, Carow, Selwyn, I'm going to release them from vassalage and place them in trust, administered by a reformed version of the Wiesengemotts estate office, with elected trustees instead of appointed ones. That's 4 more seats out of my direct control. You'd still hold 8. Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, Gaunt, Fleamont, and Pruitt. 8 seats. Still the largest single block, but not overwhelmingly so. And I'm going to delegate voting authority on 3 of them, Gaunt, Fleamont, and Peveril, to trusted allies. Neville gets 1. I'll offer 1 to Susan Bones. The 3rd stays in reserve. Daphne was staring at him. Her expression had shifted again, past surprise into something more complex. She was recalculating. Reassessing. Seeing him differently. You're voluntarily surrendering more than half your political power, she said. I'm restructuring it. There's a difference. Direct control of 5 seats with 3 delegated allies and 4 trust seats that I helped design is more power than 15 seats that everyone resents and half the chamber is trying to take away. I don't need to hold every piece on the board. I just need the right pieces in the right places. That's. She paused. Chose her words. That's the most Slytherin thing I've ever heard a Gryffindor say. The hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. Maybe it had a point. Daphne set her quill down and stood. She crossed the room to where he stood by the window, stopping an arm's length away. You're going to wrongfoot every single person in that chamber tonight. Your enemies will lose their argument. Your allies will be strengthened. And the neutral bloc will fall over themselves to support a lord who voluntarily limits his own power, because it makes him look reasonable and makes them look petty for opposing him. That's the idea. And the Malfoy hearing? Happens on schedule. 5 days. No delays, no distractions. Your father's stalling tactic fails because there's nothing left to stall against. I've already given the chamber what they wanted before they could demand it. Daphne looked at him. The afternoon light from the window caught her face, and for a moment the severity softened into something almost wondering. the expression of someone who thought they understood the game and just realized the board was bigger than they'd imagined. "You're quite good at this," she said. "I had a good teacher. Dumbledore spent 6 years showing me how to manipulate people for the greater good. The difference is, I'm telling people what I'm doing while I do it. Transparency as strategy. Honesty as strategy. It turns out that when you've spent your whole life being lied to, you develop a pretty good instinct for what the truth is worth." The emergency session was called for 7. Harry spent the afternoon preparing, not the legal documents, which Daphne handled, but himself. He showered, changed into fresh lordship robes, ate a proper meal for what felt like the first time in days, and sat in the quiet of the drawing room for 30 minutes doing nothing at all. Just breathing. Just being still. Letting his magic settle, letting the rings find their equilibrium, letting the frantic momentum of the last 2 days slow to something sustainable. Neville returned at 5 with news. The Prophet's afternoon edition is running a follow-up. Lucius's arrest is the lead story, Malfoy patriarch arrested after alleged murder plot against Lord Potter. They've got quotes from the DMLE confirming the intercepted message. How's the public reacting? Put it this way, there's a queue outside Malfoy Manor. People wanting to gawk. The Aurors had to set up a perimeter. Neville dropped into a chair. Also, I heard from Hannah Abbott. Her mother says the Abbott family is fully committed to your block. Ernie Macmillan's father is wavering, he's close to Cyrus Greengrass, and the seat limit proposal has him nervous, but Hannah thinks he'll stay on our side if you give him a reason. I'm about to give everyone a reason. Harry laid out the seat restructuring plan for Neville. When he finished, Neville was quiet for a long time, his broad hands resting on his knees, his face thoughtful. "You want me to hold a delegated seat," Neville said. "Peveril. The oldest one. It carries weight. I won't be your puppet, Harry. If you delegate the seat to me, I vote my conscience. Even if it goes against you. That's exactly why I'm giving it to you." Neville smiled, a real one, the kind that transformed his whole face and reminded Harry of the round-faced boy on the train, searching for his toad, years away from the man who'd stand in front of Voldemort and draw a sword. "All right then," Neville said. "Lord Peveril it is." At 6:30, Harry apparat to the ministry with Daphne and Neville. The atrium was chaos, reporters, onlookers, ministry workers who'd stayed late to catch a glimpse of the evening's fireworks. The Auror presence had been doubled since morning. Harry spotted Kingsley Shacklebolt near the lifts, deep in conversation with 2 senior Aurors, and their eyes met across the crowd. Kingsley gave him a nod, not political, not strategic. Just one man acknowledging another. "I see you. I know what you're doing. Go." They reached the Wisengamot corridor. The doors were already open, the chamber filling fast. Every seat was occupied or about to be, this was the fullest session since the end of the war. Harry could feel the energy from 20 feet away, a buzzing, electric tension that reminded him of the minutes before a Quidditch match when the whole stadium was holding its breath. Daphne stopped outside the doors. She straightened his collar, a gesture so instinctive and un-Daphne-like that they both froze for a second, caught in the unexpected intimacy of it. Her fingers hovered against the dark fabric, and then she pulled back, composing herself with the speed of someone who'd been composing herself her entire life. "You've got this," she said. "Go reshape the world." Harry walked in. The chamber fell quiet. Not silent, there were too many people for true silence, but the conversations dropped to whispers, and the whispers died to nothing as Harry descended the central aisle. He was aware of every eye in the room tracking him. The rings glowed faintly on his fingers. His robes moved around him in a way that suggested wind, though the air was still. He took his position on the central floor. Neville moved to the Longbottom box. Daphne took the solicitor's podium. The pieces were in place. Ogden called the session to order. He looked better than he had yesterday, more alert, more in command, as though the crisis had sharpened rather than overwhelmed him. The emergency gavel was heavier than the standard one, Harry noticed. Appropriate. This emergency session of the Wisengamot has been called to address concerns regarding the allocation of seats following yesterday's unprecedented lordship claims, Ogden said. The motion has been brought by Lord Greengrass. Lord Greengrass, the floor is yours. Cyrus Greengrass rose from the Greengrass box. He was a tall man, lean and silver-haired, with the kind of aristocratic bearing that came from centuries of breeding and a lifetime of believing in it. He looked nothing like Daphne, or rather, he looked exactly like Daphne in the bone structure and the grey eyes, but where Daphne's severity carried honesty underneath it, Cyrus's carried something colder. Calculation, maybe. Or conviction so deep it had fossilized into certainty. He didn't look at his daughter. She didn't look at him. Chief Warlock, distinguished members, Cyrus began. His voice was measured, his tone reasonable, the voice of a man presenting himself as the adult in the room. I want to be clear that this motion is not directed against Lord Potter personally. Lord Potter has shown remarkable capability and determination in claiming his birthright, and the House of Greengrass respects the ancient processes of inheritance and conquest that have brought us to this moment. Smooth. Respectful. And entirely designed to set up the knife. However, Cyrus continued, we cannot ignore the structural implications of a single lord holding 15 Wisengamot seats. This chamber was designed as a deliberative body, a place where the great families of magical Britain could meet as relative equals, debate, and govern. That design presumes a distribution of power broad enough to prevent any single voice from dominating the conversation. 15 seats, nearly a quarter of our total, concentrates power in a way that undermines the fundamental character of this institution. Murmurs of agreement from the neutral bloc. Harry watched them, 15, maybe 18 lords and ladies, the fence-sitters, the cautious ones, the people who aligned with whatever faction seemed least likely to damage their interests. I therefore propose an amendment to the Wisengamot Charter. No single lord may hold or exercise direct voting authority over more than 5 seats. Excess seats would be placed in independent trust, administered by the Chamber's Estate Office, with the original lord retaining an advisory role but no voting power. Cyrus sat down. The chamber stirred. Harry could feel the political currents shifting, the neutral bloc leaning toward Greengrass's position, the allied bloc looking to Harry for a response, the whole room poised on a fulcrum. Ogden turned to Harry. Lord Potter, you may respond. Harry stood. He didn't go to the podium, he stayed on the central floor, facing the chamber, facing Cyrus, facing all of them. Lord Greengrass raises a fair point, Harry said. The chamber blinked. Collectively, visibly. This was not what they expected. 15 seats is too much power for one person. I agree. Now they were staring. Harry let the surprise ripple outward, let it do its work, let every lord and lady in the room recalibrate their expectations. I agree, he repeated, which is why I'm not going to wait for the chamber to force a solution. I'm going to implement one myself. He reached into his robe and produced a parchment scroll, the restructuring plan, drafted with Daphne over the afternoon, signed, sealed, and ready to be entered into the record. Effective immediately, I am taking the following actions. First, the lordships of Lestrange, Rosier, and Dolohov, held by right of conquest, are hereby dissolved. These houses participated in Voldemort's war, their lines are extinct or condemned, and their legacy is one of violence and terror. I see no reason to perpetuate them. Their seats are dissolved and their voting power returns to the Chamber's general allocation. Stunned silence. Harry pressed on. Second, the vassal lordships of Crabbe, Goyle, Carrow, and Selwyn are released from vassalage to the Slytherin line. Their seats will be placed in an independent trust, administered by a new body, the Wisengamot Trust Authority, with trustees elected by the full chamber, not appointed. This removes 4 additional seats from my direct control while ensuring they are managed transparently rather than auctioned to the highest bidder. He could feel the room shifting under him like tectonic plates. The neutral bloc was leaning forward. Even Cyrus Greengrass had lost his composure, his grey eyes were wide, his careful positioning collapsing as the ground moved beneath it. Third, I am delegating voting authority on 3 of my remaining seats. The Peveril seat is delegated to Lord Neville Longbottom. Neville stood in the Longbottom box, his back straight, his face composed. The Fleamont seat is delegated to Lady Susan Bones. Susan rose in the Bones box, chin up, eyes blazing with something fierce and determined. The Gaunt seat is held in reserve, to be delegated at a future date to a candidate of my choosing, subject to chamber confirmation. Harry lowered the scroll. That leaves me with direct voting authority over 5 seats, Potter, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, and Pruitt. 5 seats. Exactly the number Lord Greengrass proposed as a maximum. He looked at Cyrus. I believe that makes his motion redundant. The chamber exploded. Not into anger, into something louder and more complex. Astonishment, admiration, frustrated outrage from those who'd been counting on a fight, and beneath it all, the dawning recognition that Harry Potter had just done something no one in the history of the Wizengamot had ever done, voluntarily relinquished power, on his own terms, in a way that made him stronger rather than weaker. Cyrus Greengrass was on his feet. His face had gone through several colors and settled on a mottled red that suggested his internal calculations were crashing against each other like waves in a storm. Lord Potter, he said, and his measured tone was fraying at the edges, this is unprecedented. The Charter does not have provisions for voluntary seat dissolution or delegation of this kind. Daphne rose from the solicitor's podium. Section 51 of the Wizengamot Charter, a lord may, at his sole discretion, dissolve seats held by right of conquest, provided the dissolution is recorded in open session and the voting power is returned to the chamber's general allocation. Section 38, a lord holding multiple seats may delegate voting authority on any seat to a qualified proxy, subject to the proxy's acceptance and recording in the official registry. Section 44, vassal lordships may be released from vassalage by the liege lord at any time, with the released seats reverting to independent status. She closed her reference book. Every action Lord Potter has taken is explicitly provided for in the Charter. The sections are clear, unambiguous, and have been on the books for over 600 years. The fact that no one has ever used them before does not make them invalid. She looked at her father. Their eyes met across the chamber, and something passed between them that the rest of the room couldn't read, something private and painful and final, like a bridge being burned by 2 people standing on opposite sides. Lord Greengrass's motion is, as Lord Potter noted, redundant. I move to table it. Seconded, Neville said from the Longbottom box. Seconded, Susan Bones echoed. Ogden looked around the chamber. All in favor of tabling Lord Greengrass's motion. The vote was overwhelming. Even members of the neutral bloc voted to table. Harry's voluntary restructuring had given them what they wanted without the political cost of opposing him. Cyrus Greengrass sat down slowly, his face blank in the way that very controlled people's faces go blank when they've been comprehensively outmaneuvered. Harry caught Daphne's eye. She was standing at the podium with the same composed expression she always wore, but there was something in her eyes, a brightness, a spark, that hadn't been there before. She just faced down her father in open session and won. Whatever that cost her privately, in this moment, she was incandescent with it. The session continued for another hour, but the real business was done. The dissolution of the conquest seats was formally recorded. The Wizengamot Trust Authority was established, with elections for its trustees scheduled for the following month. Neville and Susan formally accepted their delegated seats. The parchwork was filed, the seals were pressed, and the political map of magical Britain was redrawn in an evening. Through it all, Harry stood on the central floor and managed the room, not with threats or displays of power, but with the quiet authority of someone who had enough power to dominate and chose not to. Every concession strengthened him. Every voluntary surrender earned trust. By the time Ogden gavelled the session closed, Harry's effective political position was stronger than it had been when he walked in with 15 seats, because now it was built on something more durable than raw numbers. It was built on respect. The chamber emptied slowly. Lords and ladies filed out in clusters, talking in low, urgent voices, recalculating alliances, adjusting strategies, mapping the new terrain. Several stopped to speak with Harry. Augusta Longbottom gripped his hand with surprising strength and said nothing at all, but her eyes said everything. Ernie Macmillan's father shook his hand and formally declared his support, which meant Neville's background work had paid off. Even a few members of the neutral bloc approached, cautious, exploratory, the political equivalent of animals sniffing the wind after a storm. Cyrus Greengrass did not approach. He left through a side door without speaking to anyone, and Daphne watched him go with an expression so carefully neutral that it had to be costing her something. They made it to the corridor. The press contingent was smaller tonight, most of the journalists were still writing up the morning stories, but there were enough cameras to light up the hallway like a fireworks display. Harry gave a brief statement, the restructuring, the seat allocations, the principle of voluntary accountability, and then Daphne cut it off and steered them toward the apparition point. They landed at Grimmauld Place. The house was dark and quiet. Creature had left dinner, roast beef, this time, and a note that read, simply, Master should eat. And sleep. Creature insists. They ate. Harry, Daphne, and Neville, sitting around the dining table like soldiers after a battle, too tired for conversation but too wired for silence. The food was good. The quiet was better. Neville finished first. He pushed his plate back, stretched, and looked at Harry. "I'm going home," he said. "Hannah's expecting me." "But Harry, what you did tonight. Giving away those seats. That was..." He searched for the word. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen you do. And I watched you walk into the forest." Harry looked at his friend. The boy who'd been told he wasn't brave enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't strong enough. Who'd proved every single one of those judgments wrong. Who was sitting here now, Lord Longbottom and Lord Peveril, carrying 2 houses' worth of weight on shoulders that were more than broad enough for it. "Thanks, Nevada." Neville clapped him on the shoulder, nodded to Daphne, and left through the front door. His footsteps faded on the pavement outside, and then the crack of apparition, and then silence. Harry and Daphne sat across from each other at the table. "Your father," Harry said, "is going to have to adapt. He's smart enough for it. Whether he's flexible enough is another question. Are you okay?" "I'm always okay." "That's not an answer." Daphne set down her fork. She looked at him across the table, and the professional armor, the thing she wore like a second skin, the composure that kept the world at arm's length, thinned. Not gone. Not down. But thin enough that he could see through it to the person underneath. "My father raised me to be a weapon," she said. "A perfect pure-blood daughter who could navigate society, negotiate contracts, and advance the family's interests. He gave me the best education money could buy, trained me in law and etiquette and politics, and expected me to use all of it in service of the Greengrass name." She paused. "He didn't expect me to develop my own opinions about what those skills should be used for. That was his mistake. So you're using them for me instead." "I'm using them for what's right. You happen to be standing in the right place." Harry looked at her, this woman who had taken a wrecking ball to her own life to stand next to someone she'd barely known 3 days ago, because the law was clear and the cause was just and she couldn't be the person who looked the other way. Daphne Greengrass, who didn't do warm, who didn't do gentle, who didn't do any of the soft, comforting things that people usually offered when they cared about you. She did this instead. She showed up. She worked. She stood her ground when the ground was shaking. "The job offer still stands," Harry said. "Permanent legal advisor. 15 houses. Obscene pay. 5 houses now. You gave 10 away. 5 houses. Still obscene pay." The corner of her mouth curved. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The promise of one. I'll take it, she said. On one condition. Name it. When you inevitably do something reckless and Gryffindorish that puts you in mortal danger, you listen to me when I tell you to stop. I'll listen. I won't necessarily stop. I'll take what I can get. She stood, gathered her things, and walked to the door. She stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and turned back. Harry. Yeah. You asked me yesterday why I was doing this. The whole reason. I said to ask me when I wasn't your solicitor and you weren't my client. And now you're my permanent legal advisor, so technically, shut up. The reason is that I watched you for 7 years and I always wondered what you'd be like if someone gave you power instead of taking it from you. Now I know. She held his gaze. You're extraordinary. And I don't use that word. She left. The door closed softly behind her. Harry sat at the table and felt something warm bloom in his chest, not the searing heat of rage or the cold weight of betrayal, but something quieter and more dangerous. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. He was still sitting there when the fireplace roared green and a head appeared in the flames. Ron. His face was blotchy, his eyes red, his expression a wreckage of emotions so tangled that Harry couldn't sort them even with 15 rings worth of magical intuition. Can I come through? Ron asked. Harry's heart hammered once, hard. Come through. Ron stumbled out of the fireplace, brushing ash off his aura robes. He stood in the middle of the drawing room and looked at Harry, and Harry looked at him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything because everything they needed to say was too big for words. Ron spoke first. Mom told me. Everything. The stipend. The trust. The Pruitt money. The Burrow loan. The vote on the Malfoy settlement. His voice was rough, scraped raw. She sat me down in the kitchen and told me all of it, and Dad was there, and she cried, and he cried, and I sat there. Listening. Trying to understand how the woman who raised me could, he stopped. Swallowed. Started again. She said Dumbledore asked her to. She said she thought it was standard. She said she loved you. She said all of it, every excuse, every reason, and you know what? Some of it I even believe. She did love you. She does love you. But she also took your money, Harry. For 17 years. While you lived in a bloody cupboard. I know. I didn't know. I need you to know that. I swear on everything, I didn't know. I know that too, Ron. I believed it before I had proof. Arthur swore a magical oath. And you, I've known you since we were 11. You're a lot of things, but you're not a liar. Ron's face crumpled for a second, then hardened. He was fighting for control, and Harry recognized the battle because he'd been fighting the same one for 2 days. I'm angry, Ron said. I'm so angry I can barely see straight. Not at you, at Mum. At Dumbledore. At the whole bloody system that let this happen. You were supposed to be safe, Harry. You were supposed to be taken care of. And instead they took from you. Everyone. Including my family. Your dad didn't. My dad signed the loan. Your dad signed a document his wife put in front of him because he trusted her. That's not the same as theft. Ron ran both hands through his hair, gripping hard, the physical expression of a mind trying to hold too many things at once. What you said in the Wisengamot, about being afraid I'd talk you out of it. Were you? Yes. You were right. I would have. I would have said let's handle it privately, let's keep it in the family, let's find another way. And that would have been wrong, because there isn't another way. Not for the Malfoy stuff. Not for any of it. Harry stood up. Ron, let me finish. You did the right thing. I hate how it feels, and I hate that my family is part of it, and I hate that you had to stand in front of the Weisengomot and air our dirty laundry in front of 60 people. But you did the right thing. And I'd rather have a best friend who does the right thing and hurts me than a best friend who lies to protect my feelings." He met Harry's eyes. "We're okay. You and me. Whatever happens with Mum, whatever happens with the money, whatever happens next. We're okay." Harry felt something break inside him, not painfully. The way ice breaks in spring. A cracking, a release, a letting go of something that had been frozen solid since yesterday morning when he'd sat in Griptooth's office and learned that every foundation he'd ever stood on was built on stolen ground. "Get over here," Harry said, and Ron crossed the room and grabbed him in a hug that was rough and rib-cracking and exactly what both of them needed. They stood like that for a long moment. Two men who'd been through a war together, holding on to the thing that mattered more than money or politics or ancient rings, the messy, complicated, unbreakable bond of people who chose each other. When they separated, Ron wiped his face with his sleeve and said, with a watery grin, "So. 15 rings, huh? 5 now. I gave a bunch away." "Course you did. That's the most Harry Potter thing I've ever heard." He looked at the rings on Harry's hands. "Can I see the Gryffindor one?" Harry held up his right hand. The Gryffindor ring gleamed ruby red. "Wicked," Ron said, with exactly the same inflection he'd used at 11 years old, looking at Harry's Nimbus 2000 for the first time. Some things didn't change. They sat in the drawing room and talked until midnight. Harry told Ron everything, the full audit, Griptooth, Daphne, the Malfoy fraud in detail, the assassination attempt, the Weisengomot sessions, the restructuring. Ron listened with the focused intensity of an Auror trainee, asking sharp questions, spotting gaps Harry hadn't noticed, bringing a tactical mind to bear on problems that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with trust. "The hearing in 5 days," Ron said. "Lucius is going to fight. Even from a holding cell, he'll have people working for him. He's got Finch Fletchley. And whatever contacts he hasn't burned through yet. What about Narcissa? And Draco?" Harry told him about the conversation with Draco at the Leaky Cauldron. The offer to separate interests. The choice between the family fortune and freedom from Lucius's consequences. Ron was quiet for a moment. "You're giving Malfoy a way out. I'm giving Draco a chance to not be his father. Whether he takes it is up to him. 5 years ago, I'd have said let him burn. And now?" Ron rubbed the back of his neck. "Now I've spent a day finding out my own mother isn't who I thought she was. Turns out people are complicated. Who knew?" At 1 in the morning, Ron fell asleep on the couch. Harry covered him with a blanket, the same blanket Neville had used the night before, and went upstairs. He stopped in the hallway outside his bedroom. The portrait of Walburga Black was behind her curtain, silent for once. The house was quiet. London was quiet. The whole world felt like it was holding its breath. Harry walked past his bedroom and up the narrow stairs to the attic. He hadn't been up here in months. The attic of Grimmauld Place was a repository of Black family artifacts, most of which ranged from mildly cursed to actively hostile. But there was a window at the far end, a round porthole that looked out over the rooftops, and Harry pushed it open and let the night air hit his face. The city spread out below him. Lights and shadows, the distant hum of traffic, the vast dark bulk of the sky above. Stars, barely visible through the London glow. He held up his hands and looked at the rings. 5 now in active use, Potter, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, Pruitt, plus the Peveril, Fleamont, and Gaunt that he still wore but had delegated or reserved. The dissolved and trust-held rings remained on his fingers too, the magic didn't leave just because the political authority had been transferred. They were part of him now, woven into his magical signature, 15 threads in the tapestry of who he was. 48 hours ago, he'd been a 19-year-old with too much money and not enough purpose, rattling around in a dead man's house, trying to figure out what came after saving the world. Now he knew. What came after saving the world was building something worth saving. The Malfoy hearing would come. Lucius would face justice. The stolen money would be recovered and redistributed, not just to Harry, but to every estate that had been defrauded by the corrupt trust system Dumbledore had created. Harry had already instructed Daphne to begin a comprehensive audit of every trust managed by the Weasleys' estate office over the last 50 years. His case would be the first. It wouldn't be the last. The Weasley situation would heal. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly, the way real wounds heal, with scar tissue and sensitivity and the occasional ache when the weather changed. Molly would carry her guilt. Arthur would carry his heartbreak. Ron would carry the knowledge that the family he loved was flawed. And Harry would carry the understanding that love and betrayal could coexist in the same heart, and that forgiveness was a process, not a moment. Draco would make his choice. Harry didn't know which way it would go. But he'd given the man the one thing no one had ever given either of them, the freedom to choose without a wand at their throat. And Daphne. He thought about her standing in the Wizengamot, facing down her father with nothing but case law and conviction. He thought about her sleeping at her desk, quill in hand, building his future word by word. He thought about her saying "You're extraordinary" in the doorway of Grimmauld Place, and the way the word had sounded in her voice, not flattery, not romance, just truth. A fact, observed and stated, by a woman who dealt in facts the way other people dealt in emotions. He thought about asking her, someday, what the rest of the reason was. The night was cold and the wind was picking up, and somewhere out there, in a ministry holding cell, Lucius Malfoy was learning that the world he'd built on stolen money and borrowed power was collapsing, and that the orphan he'd robbed was the one holding the demolition charges. Harry closed the window. He went back downstairs, past the sleeping Ron, past the quiet portraits, past the drawing room where the firelight had died to embers. He climbed into bed and pulled the covers up and lay there in the dark, feeling the 15 rings warm against his skin. He slept. Not the restless, nightmare-plagued sleep of the war years. Not the empty, purposeless sleep of the months after. A deep, clean, dreamless sleep, the sleep of a man who had spent 2 days tearing down the lies that had defined his life and was finally, lying on solid ground. In the morning, there would be more to do. The hearing to prepare for. Political alliances to tend. A broken world to mend, one piece at a time. The work was just beginning, and it would take years, and it would be harder than anything he'd done before, harder than fighting Voldemort, because fighting was simple and building was not. But for now, in the dark, in the quiet, with the weight of 15 ancient houses resting on his hands and the knowledge of who he was and what he was worth settling into his bones like something that had always been there, waiting to be found, Harry Potter slept, and the rings glowed softly in the dark, and the old house wrapped around him like armor, and somewhere deep beneath London, in a vault carved from living stone, a very old goblin named Griptooth poured himself a glass of something expensive and raised it to the empty room. To Lord Potter, Griptooth said, his knife teeth gleaming. "The most interesting client I've had in 800 years." He drank. He smiled. And in the ledger open on his desk, the master ledger, the one that tracked every galleon in Gringotts, the numbers beside Harry Potter's name glowed gold, and grew, and kept growing, because the debts were being called and the contracts were being enforced and the wheels that Harry had set in motion were turning now, turning and turning and turning, and they would not stop until every stolen canute was returned and every broken oath was answered and the world was a little bit closer to what it should have been all along. The day was over. The longest day. The day that Harry Potter claimed his birthright and broke the Malfoys and confronted the Weasleys and reshaped the Wizengamot and discovered that the most powerful thing in the world wasn't magic or money or ancient rings. It was the truth, spoken plainly, by someone brave enough to speak it. And tomorrow would be even better.